Helicopters flew over the rugged mountains near Lincoln, New Hampshire for 4 days, and search and rescue crews went out looking on foot. But it wasn't until Friday night that a couple of amateur hikers found 70-year-old Chris Staff.
I just got disoriented. I got on the wrong side of, there was washouts and things like that, and I couldn't find the right path. I'd see people across the river and, I'd tell them I'm in distress, and one guy told me to come across, and I thought I had it. I thought I had somebody that's going to help me. I don't know if they're real or not, because I crossed the river and nobody's there.
Lost in the woods for nearly a month, 25-year-old Lisa Theris beat all odds, living off berries and mushrooms and drinking from creeks to survive.
Back from the dead.
When I woke up and didn't comprehend what had happened.
Hiker Michael Napinski was lifeless when Navy crews found him in Mount Rainier National Park last weekend, lost overnight in below freezing conditions.
Just got a complete whiteout.
The rescue team flew him to Harborview Medical Center in Seattle when his pulse stopped. Doctors jumping into action, administering CPR after 45 long minutes, finally jump-starting his heart.
I'm extremely grateful to everybody here at the hospital for not giving up on me. I'm alive and breathing. And
well, the big question police are asking tonight is still simply how 49-year-old Konstantinos Stanifilippidis wound up missing here at Whiteface Mountain and turned up alive nearly 3,000 miles away 6 days later in Sacramento, California.
Amanda Eller, a physical therapist who was lost on a hike in Maui, telling her story tonight for the first time since she was found after going missing for 17 days.
I haven't even had time to think or integrate or figure out really what the heck happened in there. That's a very grounded way to put it, getting disoriented in the forest. But there was something bigger at play, So Mako Forest in particular, there's something very tricky there.
Tonight, rescuers are calling it a miracle. A teenager surviving 8 days alone in the Washington wilderness on creek water and berries.
Sons John Kaparsski and Jonas Irwin feared the worst after rescue missions by land and sea turned into recovery efforts for their parents, Carol and Ian. Family and officials say it was thanks to the couple's background in the outdoors that helped them survive.
Mom's like an herbalist, like a mushroom hunter. My dad, with his background in mountaineering, they know how to find things and eat. So they were eating some part of a fern.
My mother said, I lost a shoe, so I was walking with one shoe, and then I lost the other shoe, and I kept walking in my socks, and then I got tired of walking in my socks, so then I was walking bare feet for a while, and she's 77 years old.
He was laying his body flat into that awful thorny crap, which poison oak, you name it, so that Carol could go over him.
Police and 19-year-old Madison Popalizio never came home Sunday after hiking on Mount Algonquin. More than 60 people set out to search for them Monday, fighting their way through deep snow and rough terrain. 36 hours after they went missing, the hikers were airlifted from just below the 5,000-foot summit.
Tonight, the miraculous rescue of Cheryl Powell, finally surrounded by family again. The 60-year-old who went missing in Central California's White Mountains, found alive just hours ago, 3 days after she vanished in the wilderness.
A remarkable story of survival. New details tonight about a mother from the San Fernando Valley who was stranded in Utah's Zion National Park. She was missing for nearly 2 weeks before she was finally rescued.
Now, we're all familiar with cases where people have gone missing in the forest, having left no trace and are never seen again. But what of the people who went missing and have returned? In many instances, these people tend to be unable to remember what happened during their ordeal. Now, this is understandable in the case of small children, but it's a common situation with adults who've gone missing and returned as well. Oftentimes, though, even those who do remember are reticent to talk about what happened when they were missing. Now, this may sound odd, but when you hear the stories of those who are willing to talk about it, it starts to make more sense. Presented here are 13 stories of those who have disappeared, yet lived to return and share their bizarre tales. Let's begin. Robert Singley. Now, if you ask the locals in Bennington, Vermont, they'll tell you there's something very wrong with Glastonbury Mountain. That particular stretch of the Appalachian Trail has caused many investigators into the paranormal to come to some pretty ominous conclusions because of all the people who have gone missing there, never to be seen again. Some call it the Bennington Triangle, a reference to the Bermuda Triangle, where not only people but planes and ships go mysteriously missing, never to be seen again, with no rhyme, reason, or explanation. There are also tales told of a Bennington monster, which attacks humans and abducts them, leaving no trace they were ever there. Others still talk of the Native American stories of rocks that open up and swallow people whole in this place, as this is where the four winds meet. None of this seemed to be of any concern, though, to 27-year-old UBC music teacher Robert Singley when he decided to go for a hike one Sunday afternoon a couple of years ago. Robert hiked the trail often when he lived in Bennington and never had any strange experiences or problems. He hiked Harbor Road in Woodford Hollow and had a pleasant enough time despite the cold temperature. However, while he made his way back to his car, he suddenly became very disoriented. He attempted to make a fire once he realized he was lost, and because darkness was falling, he didn't stand much chance of making it back to his car until daylight came. However, his attempts were futile because of the rain that suddenly started almost immediately upon Robert losing his way. As his girlfriend at home worried, Robert struggled to gain an understanding of what happened, why he had so suddenly become confused and disoriented. Robert stated, "I still think I got sucked through some sort of space-time continuum." He often took these long hikes, but on this day, fog came out of nowhere, and it was instantly dark, seemingly much before the time of nightfall. Robert couldn't explain how he managed to just lose the trail he was so steadily walking on only seconds before. He spent the night underneath a tree and somehow made his way out the following day. He is one of the lucky ones. This exact spot is where Paula Weldon, a Bennington College sophomore, was last seen alive 62 years ago. There's something about random inclement weather in these cases, kind of like Mother Nature is playing a game. Seems that in a lot of missing person cases, immediately once a search starts, foul weather comes in. Now, what is causing all these seemingly healthy and somewhat experienced hikers to suddenly and for no apparent reason become disoriented and start wandering through deep woods instead of sticking to their trails? That's a question we may never have an answer to, but let's move on. Christopher Staff. Christopher Staff, a 70-year-old man from Dorchester, Massachusetts, went hiking alone in New Hampshire's White Mountains. He decided to embark on the very challenging 31-mile Pemigewasset Loop Trail with no problems or concerns. He had even called his wife the following day and told her he would be home by that evening. He seemed in good spirits and as though the hike had been going well. Later that evening, after receiving no further word from Christopher, his wife called the authorities and reported him missing. A large-scale rescue effort was put in effect with 18 teams, including nearly 30 officers and volunteers, all out scouring the trail and surrounding areas looking for any sign of Christopher. Fear for his life and well-being mounted as the days passed by, and no sign was found that Christopher had even been in these woods or along this trail. However, the following Friday, 5 days after Christopher had initially set out for his hike and seemingly disappeared without a trace, he was found just sitting on a log, covered in scratches, blisters, and bug bites, and was only able to walk to the rescue vehicles with assistance. When questioned about what happened, Christopher stated, "I'm still trying to sort it all out." Christopher was an experienced hiker of more than 40 years and thought he had been well prepared for most anything that would come up while he completed the hike of a lifetime after turning 70 years old. Christopher was less than 5 miles from the end of the 31-mile loop when something went very wrong. He says he suddenly became disoriented on the path and couldn't find the right way to go. He had lost his backpack, which contained water, and had to resort to drinking from the river. Now, this may or may not have had to do with him then spending the next 3 to 4 days hallucinating. I didn't know where I was, he says. I thought I came home. I thought I came to get my wife's car. All kinds of crazy things. Christopher had lost 25 pounds and was found less than 5 miles away from the road where his car was left. He just couldn't move anymore. He even mentioned hallucinating while at the river that he saw and heard searchers coming to get him and looking for him. However, when he would blink, they would be gone. I just kept reliving it, Christopher says. He knew Friday would be his last day if help hadn't arrived by then. He was seemingly traumatized from the event and hasn't really recovered. Now, how does someone end up hallucinating like this suddenly and out of the clear blue sky? Christopher had just turned 70 years old, but was in great shape and healthy, so what caused him to simply give up and sit on a rock when he was so close to help the whole time? After all the wandering he had done, was 5 miles really that far for him to traverse to get to the main road? Was whatever made him sick and disoriented somehow stopping him from going on? What could have possibly caused such vivid hallucinations? Story after story, it's the same thing. Point of separation or going out alone and becoming disoriented and hallucinating. Here's another one. Michael St. Laurent. 45-year-old construction safety worker and experienced hiker Michael St. Laurent went missing for 9 days in the wilderness of the North Vancouver backwoods. He scribbled pertinent information about himself onto his arm. His birth date, name, and social insurance number were sloppily scrawled there just in case he didn't make it out of the woods alive. This all started on November 13, 2011, near the Grouse Mountain Sky Ride, where, while hiking a trail, he suddenly and without warning became confused and disoriented, not knowing where he was going, and what was and was not even real. Michael's account is somewhat confusing and even contradictory, as he states he was hallucinating so badly for most of the time, it was hard for him to recall most of what had occurred during his 9 days of hell in the woods. Michael had planned to hike a roughly 8-hour round-trip trail. However, he was somehow held up and forced to spend the night in the deep wilderness. Fortunately for him, he happened to have not only a dry change of clothes, but a tarp with him, and managed to stay at least partially dry and semi-warm in the frigid Vancouver winter cold. Michael even prepared for a 2-day trip, though he expected to only stay one, assuming he would be fine and ahead of the game in case anything unforeseen came up. Unfortunately for him, something did. It lasted much longer than the 2 days, though. Michael's mind was so foggy and muddled, however, that after becoming lost and veering off the main trail, he couldn't even manage to find any kindling there in the woods, despite the ability to make a fire by hand. For the next 7 days, he wandered aimlessly around the woods, dehydrated, hypothermic, and vividly hallucinating nonstop. He said his hallucinations included being at work, driving home, and even sitting down for a meal in his favorite restaurant. After just 3 days, he thought it had been 3 weeks. Although there were numerous hikers who passed through the area within view of him, Michael was seemingly totally unable to communicate with them in any way. Not for lack of trying, though, as he says he called out for help and did everything he could to get their attention, but to no avail. It was almost like he was invisible to anyone and everyone who passed him by. The only thing the searchers believed saved him was his somehow remarkable ability to remember to cover himself at night with a tarp. At times, he had even had to crawl as he had developed a condition from wearing soaked footwear called trench foot. When speaking to the media after being rescued, Michael told them he had seen and heard the searchers looking for him, but was unable to communicate with them and gain their attention, and somehow he claimed they hadn't been able to see or hear him at all. The search and rescue teams deny ever being anywhere near the area Michael stated he saw and heard them. What prompted Michael to write down his personal information on his arm, just in case? He said himself it was a regular day, and he had the entire hike planned out. Is it just a coincidence that this is yet another semi-experienced hiker who, for one reason or another, was separated from his group and ended up lost in the woods? What is prompting these people to put themselves in harm's way like this? Lisa Theris. 25-year-old Alabama resident and radiology student Lisa Theris had a couple of strikes against her already as far as anyone finding her when she became lost in the woods in Midway, Alabama for an entire month in July of 2017. She had severe bipolar disorder, and because of the crowd she was recently hanging out with, most who knew her thought she was just trying to get away for a while. After not being able to reach her at all in 5 days, her father eventually called the police and reported her missing. After searching the most obvious places and coming up with no sign of her, the police then caught up with the last 2 people known to have been in her company, who were also wanted in connection with the robbery of a hunting lodge. When the authorities finally did catch up with these 2 men, one of them claimed the other killed Lisa and had disposed of her body. This led investigators to bring dogs into the woods behind a local Walmart where she may or may not have last been seen, and where the 2 men said they had last seen her. The other man said she was not murdered, but had jumped out of the truck and ran into the woods for no apparent reason the last night they had been with her. Because of the conflicting stories given by the 2 men and their shady and criminal reputations, police decided to go ahead with the cadaver dog search of the woods. After all, Lisa had been missing an entire month, and the likelihood she could survive out there in the wilderness for that long was slim. Eventually, Lisa was pronounced dead, even as the police still searched for her body. 2 days after this pronouncement, however, Lisa stumbled into the road in front of a random vehicle that just happened to be driving by at that time. Lisa had collapsed onto the roadway, and an ambulance was called. She was completely naked, covered in sunburns and bug bites, and it was said she wouldn't have lasted another day had she not made her way somehow to the main road to be found and given medical attention. She had lost 50 pounds, and it was considered miraculous that she had even survived at all. Her condition was barely stable. When she was finally able to recount her harrowing ordeal, she gave an extremely strange and seemingly nonsensical story about what she had been through. She claims to have survived from eating wild mushrooms and berries and drinking muddy and mucky stream water. When asked how she had come to be in the woods in the first place, Lisa states she believes she was drugged and left there for dead. There is some question, however, as to how Lisa could have survived based on her claims. Number 1, she was legally blind and didn't have her glasses. Number 2, the berries she claimed to have eaten didn't grow in that area. And thirdly, mushrooms are made mostly of water and have no calories at all. Also, she would have gotten terribly ill, if not dying altogether, from drinking the water she claims to have hydrated herself with. What really happened to Lisa? How could she have eaten berries which didn't grow in the particular area? Was she making it all up, or had she possibly slipped into another dimension or something? Those are questions to which we may never have the answers. Michael Napinski. 45-year-old Michael Napinski of Woodinville, Washington, went on a hike in Mount Rainier with a friend on November 7, 2020. The 2 decided to separate below the Muir snowfield, with Michael snowshoeing to Paradise and his friend continuing on skis to Camp Muir. They were going to meet up at a designated time down near Paradise, close to where Michael was heading to. Suddenly and seemingly out of nowhere, Michael reports the weather turned to extreme whiteout conditions, which prohibited him from being able to see even an inch in front of his face. Obviously, this made it impossible for him to go any further. He recalls taking very small and easy steps to get himself slowly down the mountain, while still seeing nothing but the whiteout conditions ahead of him. This is the last thing he remembers before becoming confused about the next course of events. He says he thinks he fell, but can't be sure as he totally blacked out and has no memory of what actually occurred while he was blindly snowshoeing through the blizzard conditions. Needless to say, Michael didn't make it back to meet his friend near Paradise that evening and was reported as missing. 3 National Park search teams went out and conducted full searches of the area throughout the night, and because the temperatures being 16 degrees Fahrenheit and the whiteout causing minimal to no visibility, the searches were called off for the night. Early Sunday morning, however, the search teams went back out to look for Michael, though everyone's thoughts were grim and thinking the worst at this point. Because of the cloudy weather, too, the aerial searches weren't able to be started until late Sunday afternoon, nearly 24 hours after Michael had been reported as missing by his concerned friend. Helicopter searchers finally found Michael Napinski in the Nisqually River drainage, and by the time foot searchers got to him about an hour after he was first sighted, he was unconscious. He had a pulse, though weak as it was, when he reached the hospital, but went into cardiac arrest very shortly after arriving. the doctors began using the most advanced form of artificial life support available, which included bypassing his heart and lungs. Miraculously, or some say coincidentally due to the location where he went missing and all the strangeness surrounding Mount Rainier itself, Michael was legally deceased for 45 minutes, yet was able to be brought back to life with no long-term negative effects. Although he remained unconscious for 2 days after his heart started beating again, Michael did wake up and come back to life suffering some frostbite and bruises and scratches, all of which will heal. Is it just a coincidence that this man, who had all of the same bizarre and seemingly random symptoms as so many of the other cases we've talked about here, was miraculously able to return from the dead after 45 minutes? That's not even supposed to be possible. What is really going on here? Danny Philippides. On February 7, 2018, Danny Philippides ventured from his home in Toronto, Canada, to the Whiteface Mountains of New York for a seemingly typical ski trip with some co-workers. The 49-year-old firefighter went missing on the mountain when he separated from the group to go to his car and retrieve his cell phone, which he had initially forgotten to bring with him. He went off by himself, figuring he would be right back and go back to having fun with his friends and colleagues. However, that isn't what happened at all, and despite little bits and pieces that have come out since, we will perhaps never really know what happened to Danny Philippides. Despite having no memory of what happened after he started back down the mountain to go to his car for the phone, he believes he took a wrong turn on a children's ski slope. The doctors would later confirm that he did seem to be suffering from a head injury, but even that doesn't explain where Danny ended up after leaving his friends to run the quick and seemingly harmless errand. Once Danny was reported missing, a manhunt of epic proportions set out to try and find him. At least 6 government agencies joined the 2 local ski patrols and several volunteers in the search. Eventually, more than 135 volunteers searched the area he was last seen and the route he should have taken to his car, which was still parked in the exact same spot he had left it, with the cell phone inside, for a total of 7,000 hours, but to no avail. How could they possibly have known that Danny was at that time in a big rig truck, hitchhiking across the country to California? Danny also remembers being dropped off in Sacramento, still wearing his ski clothes, and with a brand new cell phone and, inexplicably, a haircut. He was eventually found wandering around the Sacramento Airport rental car facility's parking lot. He had absolutely no idea or clue as to how he ended up there or why. The authorities found him got the surprise of a lifetime when they learned he was the subject of a massive manhunt all the way on the other side of the country. Obviously, so did Danny upon learning the same information. What happened in those 6 days? Where did Danny get the haircut and the new iPhone? And what could have possibly led him all the way across a foreign country like that? More than 2 years later, and these questions still haven't been answered. They may never be either, as Danny has since chosen to remain quiet about the ordeal and has gone back to work in Toronto as a firefighter. Unfortunately, so many of these people who go missing and are found under extraordinary circumstances choose to remain silent about what they encountered, even the ones who remember very clearly. Is this another symptom caused by who or what is doing this to these people? The inability to express what happened? Or is it that there are just no words in our vocabulary to explain what they might have seen or experienced? Amanda Eller. Amanda Eller is a 35-year-old physical therapist and yoga instructor who wanted to go and explore the Makawao Forest Reserve on the northern side of Maui, Hawaii, on May 9, 2019. What was supposed to be a 3-mile relaxing hike to help her get closer to nature ended up turning into a 3-week ordeal that had her fighting for her life. Ellen was reported missing when she never showed back up when she said she would, and when her car was spotted parked near a vast forest reserve in Hawaii, it prompted thousands of volunteers to come out and start immediately searching the vast jungles and streams in the surrounding areas. On a Friday afternoon, 17 days after she first headed out on her hike, and less than an hour after her family had announced a $50,000 reward for information leading to her whereabouts, Ms. Eller was found with sunburn, scrapes, a torn ligament in her knee, and a broken leg. She was malnourished, but she was alive. So what happened to Amanda Eller? How had she become so lost so quickly on what was seemingly a simple and easy, relaxing trail walk through which she had gone many times before without any problems? Now, it's true the area of the reserve is 2,000 acres and has such thick vegetation and brush it needs to be hacked with machetes, but Amanda was on a trail. Here's what she had to say. Amanda claimed she was just going on the short trail walk, which she had done many times before and was really enjoying it. It was just a typical thing on a typical day. As she went off the path at one point to sit and rest, she became disoriented and confused. She stated a very strange gut instinct was pulling her into the opposite direction than the one she was familiar with and knew was right. She decided to go the way towards where she thought her car was, figuring if she just walked towards there, at least she would have a handle on where she was headed. She ended up hiking from around 10:30 a.m. that morning until midnight that night in a desperate search for her car. She admits being ready to just give up and stop trying, but claims as soon as she did, she would hear a certain very loud and strong insistent voice telling her that if she wanted to live, she needed to keep going. She stated, "As soon as I would doubt my intuition and try to go another way than where it was telling me, something would stop me. A branch would fall on me, I'd stub my toe, or I'd trip. So it seems the same gut instinct that seemed to have initially led her astray was in fact now leading her back to where she needed to be, back on the right path." Many people have started to believe that Amanda had actually been abducted. Her cell phone, water bottles, and wallet were all left behind in her car. On the third day, she'd given up looking for her car and decided to start looking for water instead. However, she fell off a 20-foot cliff and tore the ligament in her knee, while the very next day, she lost her shoes in a flash flood. She was only wearing a tank top and yoga pants to begin with, and the injury and loss of her shoes slowed her down considerably. At night, she covered herself with ferns and branches and leaves. She even spent one night in a wild boar's den. She survived by eating almost anything she could find, things that were identifiable and some that weren't. She even ate moths that landed on her body. She began to crawl instead of walking and was then confronted with a seemingly impassable steep drop-off. Meanwhile, the volunteer searchers were going through their own harrowing ordeals as the search for Amanda led many of them into fast-moving streams and had them rappelling into ravines. Some even killed aggressive wild boars and searched the dead animals' intestines for Amanda's body parts. At least one searcher was attacked by a wild boar but managed to get away and survive. Amanda stated later that she had seen and heard multiple helicopters, but despite trying her best to get their attention, they never spotted her. Until eventually, one did and sent rescue. How did this woman survive so many days in the wilderness, with no shoes and with the injuries and Mother Nature seemingly against her at every single turn? Could it have been the voice she heard, loud and clear, telling her she must choose between life and death? If so, who or what was it? Luckily, Amanda chose life. Gia Fuda. 18-year-old Giovanna Fuda, or Gia as she likes to be called, decided to go for a drive on July 24, 2020, and was headed to a town about 70 miles east of Seattle. The teenager just wanted to go and take a short road trip alone to clear her head and relax. For reasons still unknown, however, she ventured much farther than she initially set out to and ended up far past the city views of Seattle and into the wilderness and wilds of a remote area of Washington state. By 1 a.m. the next morning, when her parents had received no response back from their many phone calls and texts to Gia, and when she herself hadn't returned home or even checked in, they decided to call the authorities and report their daughter as missing. At around 10 a.m. the morning she had left her home and started her trip, she was seen on video camera in a coffee shop near the town of Index. She bought a Bigfoot keychain and left. 3 days after her disappearance, on July 27th, a transportation worker found her car nearby that shop and reported it to the police. He said he only noticed the car because of the awkward way in which it was parked. After running the license plate, the authorities found that the car was Gia's and it had run out of gas. All the doors were locked and her purse and other personal items were left inside. At this point, the police started to think foul play was involved and maybe she had been forcibly abducted. Search and rescue teams were already out and looking for her as of July 26th, but the area made it impossible to track her by pings because it was a cell phone dead zone. On August 1st, some of the searchers found Gia's belongings, such as her shoes, Bible, bag, and cell phone. These possessions were found near Scenic Creek, and just a little while later that same day, Gia was found up a steep ravine sitting on a rock next to the river. Gia stated she had panicked when her car had run out of gas and decided it would cut some of the walking distance off where she'd cut through the woods to get to a gas station. She said that she was frightened and didn't know what to do, so she grabbed what she felt was most important that she could carry and locked the rest of her possessions in her car. She was found 10 miles away from the nearest gas station. She felt that walking along the highway was too dangerous, but ended up getting lost and wandering around the forest for 9 days. She thought she was only lost for 3 days, however, as she lost her sense of time. When she was first found, Gia just kept repeating, "I don't know where I am," over and over again, as if in some sort of trance. She was eventually taken to the hospital, though, and managed to get through the ordeal with no long-term effects. It didn't go unnoticed, though, to many people who investigated or looked further into the case, that Gia had purchased a Bigfoot keychain right before going through this harrowing and terrifying ordeal. Coincidence or not? Carol Kaparsski and Ian Irwin. Married couple Carol Kaparsski and Ian Irwin, aged 77 and 72 respectively, were staying in a cottage while on vacation in the Sea Haven, Inverness, California area in February of 2020 when, on their checkout date, which was the 15th, came and went without the couple ever returning home or being seen leaving. They went missing on the 14th and left belongings, including their wallets and cell phones, in their room, and their car was also still parked where it had been the last time they were seen. Little did they know their careers would come in handy while trying to survive 8 days lost in the wilderness. Carol was an herbalist and mushroom hunter, while Ian had a background in mountaineering. When the couple were reported missing, searchers scoured the area by air, boat, and land for days, but to no avail. Finally, on February 20th, officials said their search efforts were now transitioning to a recovery effort. Now, usually this means they assume the couple were deceased and the searchers were looking to recover their bodies. Then, 8 days after they were last seen, the 22nd, the couple were miraculously found alive and mostly well in the dense terrain with only light hypothermia to recover from. Carol and Ian told authorities that they decided to go for a simple and romantic hike for Valentine's Day, but got lost in the dark. They couldn't find their way back and survived by drinking muddy puddle water. The couple is choosing to remain silent about their ordeal and said they may eventually be able to tell of how they survived a terrifying 7 nights in the Inverness wilderness. All we do know is that one point is a bit strange. Carol willingly took her shoes off, which caused Ian to have to lay down in thick thorns so she could use his body as a kind of bridge to walk across. One can only imagine what they each could have been thinking during all this, but it just doesn't seem to make much sense. Why not just keep her shoes on and walk across? Also, how does someone get so lost, even in the dark, on such a simple hiking trail that they end up in such an extremely dangerous and dense brush area? Until the couple decide to recount their harrowing ordeal, we probably won't know the answers to this one either. Maddie Popolizio and Blake Alois. Maddie Popolizio and her boyfriend Blake Alois had just reached the top of the second highest mountain in New York State, the Algonquin, when what they planned to be just a quick day hike very quickly went all wrong. According to 19-year-old Maddie, everything was fine around noon that day. The weather was beautiful, and the couple didn't foresee any trouble at all and thought it was going to be a regular hike through the beautiful scenery of the area. They couldn't have been more wrong. All of a sudden, and seemingly out of nowhere, a fog so intense, dense, and thick came over the entire mountain, leaving the two completely blind. They couldn't see an inch in front of them. Does that sound familiar? Only in this case it's fog and not the sudden whiteout of snow from a previous disappearance. Maddie stated, "As soon as we got to the top, a massive fog came over the entire summit. It was so intense I could not see my hand in front of my face. If I wasn't latched onto Blake, I would have completely lost him." Then, when a sudden snowstorm hit at the summit, the couple decided immediately that their best course of action would be to climb back down the mountain. However, whiteout conditions from the fog and snow prevented them from seeing the trail that they had followed up. They linked arms and decided then to walk towards a clearing they thought might lead to a trail back down. Unfortunately, as soon as their feet lifted off the rock they were standing on at the summit, they plummeted down 100 feet. This unfortunate turn of events landed them on the opposite side of the summit from which they'd originally climbed up. Luckily, the couple landed on bent, snow-covered trees and, with their snowshoes, tried to climb back up the side of the mountain to get back up to the summit and reassess the situation. This didn't seem to be working, however. Despite wearing the snowshoes, the couple recalled, "Even with the snowshoes, we were just falling through massive amounts of snow." Terrified and with nowhere to go, the couple returned to the more secure spot they had fallen to on top of the trees. Then they built a wall of snow to try and block the wind and light Ian's backpack on fire with a fire starting kit they had with them. The intense winds and heavy snow prevented any fire heat from being made or generated, though, and the couple feared they weren't going to make it out of this situation alive. Their phones had no power or service, and they spent the first day screaming at the top of their lungs for help, assuming they would be rescued by nightfall. However, that wasn't the case. They spent 2 more days this way. huddled together, keeping each other as warm as they could with body heat and each trying to keep the other sane. When they were finally rescued, they were located about 265 feet southeast of the mountain summit. Ground crews eventually came upon them, still on top of the bent and snow-covered trees. The couple told of how, on the first night, Maddie couldn't feel her toes because of the freezing cold snow, and in an attempt to keep her warm, Blake emptied out his backpack and zipped it up around her feet and legs. Within minutes, she regained feeling in her toes, but useful supplies such as their knife, rechargeable crank light, and 90% of their food were lost forever in the deep snow. There were multiple times where Maddie had fallen into snow which covered over the top of her head, and Blake lost his gloves pulling her out to save her life. Luckily, the couple didn't sustain any long-term injuries or effects from their strange and terrifying ordeal. Why is it that blinding weather always comes along in the blink of an eye and makes hikers unable to see and therefore puts them at risk for major injury and incapacitation? It's the same thing over and over again and completely defies any logic or explanation. Some may say Mother Nature is just a fickle woman and changes her mind on a whim, but there are others, those of us that don't believe in so much coincidence, who wonder, is there something else at play here? Cheryl Powell, 60-year-old Cheryl Powell from Huntington Beach, California, went missing for 4 days in the remote wilderness of the White Mountains near the Nevada border. She claims a knife-wielding maniac chased her into the backcountry. Cheryl reported that, as her husband set up their campsite, she decided to take their dog for a short walk. This is when she says the man accosted her. All of a sudden, some guy pops out from behind a tree or something, she said, as she described the incidents which led to her disappearance. It was scary. I was really nervous about the fact he was threatening to do my dog harm. Though she admittedly bolted right away, Cheryl says she didn't feel safe that she was alone in the woods until at least a full 24 hours later. Her disappearance kicked off an intense 4-day search by the Inyo County Sheriff's Department. They interviewed other campers in the area, Cheryl's husband, of course, and they even used a loudspeaker to call out to the couple's dog, Miley. Search and rescue also combed the area, searching on foot with dogs and conducting aerial searches as well, but all to no avail. The strange part is, though, that aside from not finding any evidence of Cheryl or her dog being anywhere in the area, there were also no reports of a suspicious person or vehicle either. Where had this man, described by Cheryl as big, burly, bald, and tan, come from? Where had he gone? Cheryl's family very quickly started urging the authorities to start working under the assumption that she had been abducted. Eventually, it was Miley the dog's barking that alerted the authorities to Cheryl's whereabouts. Aside from being very scared and extremely exhausted, Cheryl was found alive and safe. As for the knife-wielding attacker who initially chased Cheryl into the woods, there have been no reports at all besides her initial description of any suspicious persons, vehicles, or activities that day. Who or what was it that chased Cheryl? Could this be yet another reason for some of the many disappearances across the country and even the world? Why had there been no other reports at all about a suspicious-looking man? Was Cheryl somehow the only one who could see him? Even if so, what did he want, and why hadn't he given chase when Cheryl initially took off? Very odd indeed that he just let her run off and didn't give chase. Could he have been trying to lure her into the woods for another reason? Perhaps for someone or something other than himself? For now, we just don't have any answers. Alma Tolman. Alma Tolman was an Eagle Scout and experienced camper when he seemed to have vanished into thin air while on a camping outing on Antelope Island. Antelope Island, with an area of 42 square miles, is the largest of 10 islands located within the Great Salt Lake, Utah. Alma was dropped off on the island on Tuesday, April 29, 1998, and was scheduled to be picked up by his brother that Friday, May 1st. When his brother returned to pick him up, he waited several hours. As Alma's canteen and backpack were missing, his brother assumed he had gone on a hike. Eventually, though, when his brother hadn't returned, Alma's brother became very concerned he'd gotten lost or possibly injured while out hiking. Searches of the island and surrounding waters were done by boat, helicopter, and ground crews of up to 50 people. Dogs were also deployed to search, but no trace of Alma was found. There were reports of him cashing a check at a local Walmart after he had been reported missing, and also surveillance footage of someone matching his description at a 7-Eleven in Syracuse. However, neither of these sightings could be definitively confirmed as Alma, and so the investigation went on. The strangeness of this case, however, has a total human element to it, with it later coming out that Alma actually did disappear on purpose to get out of moving to Italy that June and getting married. Seems Alma had a case of the wedding jitters and cold feet, which is kind of an extreme measure to disappear yourself for those reasons. Needless to say, Alma was found alive and well a few days later, and eventually admitting it had all been an elaborate ruse to get out of the move in the marriage. Holly Cordier. 38-year-old California mom Holly Cordier went missing in one of America's most beloved and most treacherous frontiers for 2 whole weeks without being found. Despite the media frenzy her disappearance eventually caused, nobody is really sure how Holly ended up where she did. It's speculated she was having some sort of mental breakdown as she left her house in the middle of the night without telling anyone where she was going. She later stated she was seeking a total disconnect from the world and wanted to be completely alone by herself for a while. However, Holly seemed to have gotten more than she bargained for, as while she certainly got some time alone, the injuries she ended up suffering were strange enough, but her story doesn't make much sense either. Here's what we know about what happened to Holly Cordier at Zion State Park and what she said when she was found on October 18, 2020. She was visibly exhausted, famished, dehydrated, had lost 15 pounds, and was found to have a concussion. What was supposed to be a brief spiritual pilgrimage turned into a fight for her life. Her disappearance is different because the widespread panic on the internet and the massive amounts of pleas for help in finding Holly and pleas from her family turned into conspiracies and hate messages, so many that the family had to cancel all social media accounts and even change their phone numbers. So, what caused all this vitriol towards a woman who simply wanted to disconnect for a little while and raise her spiritual vibration? What caused Holly to, seemingly out of nowhere, get up and sneak off like a thief in the night to simply go for a hike? According to her family, Holly is an experienced hiker who knows Zion National Park very well and is capable of surviving the extreme and rugged conditions. Holly hit her head on the sharp edge of a tree she had her hammock tied to, and this happened very shortly after arriving and starting up the first trail. This knock on the head caused extreme disorientation. After this blow to the head, she didn't have the energy to move around anymore. Despite being close to a river, Holly refused to drink the water because of concerns about toxicity. When found 2 weeks later, Holly was so dehydrated she couldn't open her mouth. Luckily, Holly was found alive and didn't have any long-term injuries, though her kidneys were barely functioning and she had an extreme lack of potassium. She did make a full recovery. One unanswered question looms, though, in both skeptics and believers of Holly's story alike. Why, when she could hear the searchers close and calling her name, when she called back to them, they never heard or saw her there? They were within feet of Holly. She was too weak to approach them, and they never noticed her yells, nor her person, sitting, literally praying she would make it out of this ordeal alive. Hello, friends. Today, we'll be talking about unbelievable tragedies in national parks. On this channel, we talk a lot about the missing people all over the world, and especially here in our national parks in the United States. What many people don't realize is that there are so many other tragedies that happen on an almost daily basis that hardly anyone ever hears about. Now, these aren't always fatalities. Sometimes it's minor accidents and injuries. What we are presenting to you in this video, though, are those tragedies that end in a person or persons being deceased. What could have been done to prevent these disasters? Well, in each case, there's something different, and maybe, in some, even there was nothing that could have helped to prevent such atrocious acts of nature being brought about. Are these things being brought on by unseen forces? Are there other things at play here than just terrible accidents of nature? Let's begin. In Arches National Park in 2020 in the state of Utah, United States, a woman named Esther Nakajigo, known as Essie, and her new husband, Ludovic Michaud, known as Ludo, had left their campsite and gone to get some ice cream. What a simple act, having a hankering for something sweet while out and about exploring the wilderness. The fact these two were newlyweds just makes the story all the more tragic and bittersweet. It was a Saturday, and the weather forecast called for a high of 95 and a low of 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Bright, sunny skies, just driving along eating their ice cream and enjoying each other's company, like only a newly married couple can. All of a sudden, though, a strong wind blew in and an unsecured gate sliced through the car like a knife through hot butter, according to an administrative claim that was filed in October of the same year. The gate missed Ludo by only an inch or less, But unfortunately, dear sweet Essie was not as lucky. An internationally recognized women's rights activist, originally from Uganda, Legate decapitated her in just an instant. In a split second, she lost her life. And her husband, originally from Paris but now living in Denver, Colorado, is now a widower. What makes this tragedy even more unbelievable is the fact that but for the price of a dollar store padlock, Essie's life could have been saved. At the age of just 17, she was rising to fame after being named the ambassador to women and girls in her home country. She was using the money she earned from this position to put herself through college and fund a nonprofit community health facility for women in the poor third world country. In the blink of an eye, her young and meaningful life was taken away, and her family is absolutely devastated, even going as far as to file a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against the Parks and Recreation Services. It makes us wonder if going missing isn't the only way the unknown forces we speak of so often that are lurking in our woods, forests, and national parks can take such a meaningful and precious young life. It seems like there's something out there that just doesn't want us, or certain people anyway, in the woods. Also in June, but a few years earlier, 2016, a man named Colin Nathaniel Scott from Portland, Oregon, slipped and fell into a hot spring in Yellowstone National Park. Now, Yellowstone is the country's first ever national park. It spans almost 3,500 miles and is mainly located in the state of Wyoming, but even runs into parts of Montana and Idaho. The park is beautiful, with geysers shooting water over 100 feet in the air, mud spots, and waterfalls that will take your breath away. These are surely some of the things that drew Colin to Yellowstone in the first place. He had no idea these very things, these beautiful and breathtaking creations of nature, would end his life that hot day in June 2016. Colin's sister was recording him with her cell phone when he attempted to do something which is actually not legal in the park. He strayed off the designated boardwalk in the Norris Geyser Basin that bright and sunny Tuesday morning. Now, waters there can reach as high as 200 degrees Fahrenheit, 93 Celsius. Colin was literally boiled alive. He slipped and fell in accidentally while attempting to hot pot or soak in one of the park's thermal pools. According to the Deputy Chief Ranger, the whole area is geothermically active. There's a closure in place to protect people from doing that for their own safety. It's a very unforgiving environment. That being soaking in the hot spots as Colin was allegedly attempting to do. That same ranger, Mr. Laurent Theris, alleges that Colin and his sister were purposefully ignoring the many posted warning signs despite the obvious potential for real danger. His sister recorded Colin as he reached down to test the water with his finger, and he slipped and fell in, being boiled alive as she watched on in horror, completely helpless to do anything but scream for help. Thankfully, his death was almost instantaneous once he fell in. He didn't suffer. But there was never any hope of rescue. An unforgiving environment indeed. Rescue teams located his body later on that day. However, due to approaching inclement weather, which we see often in missing persons cases, mainly a lightning storm, they were unable to retrieve his body without risking very significant danger to their own safety and even to their very lives. So, unfortunately, the recovery effort was held off until the next day. But by the following day, however, search and rescue were unable to find any significant remains of the unfortunate young man who just wanted to have an adventure in one of the most beautiful and scenic places in all the United States. Mr. Theris said, "Unfortunately, there was a very significant amount of dissolving. He truly was boiled alive." Next, we have 63-year-old Robert Boardman, who was hiking with his wife and a friend in Olympic National Park in Washington State. He had to be rushed by the Coast Guard in a helicopter to a hospital in Port Angeles, where he was pronounced dead on arrival after being gored in the leg by a wild mountain goat. Mountain goats are not native, but were introduced into this area in the 1920s and can actually become quite tolerant of the close approach of humans. The problem is, once this happens, they become habituated and lose their natural fear of us and then they're apt to try and start asserting dominance over us, which could lead to an attack just like this. Although normally not aggressive, it is recommended that you stay at least 50 feet away from them at all times and never ever urinate on a trail where there's a potential for mountain goats. Also, people who are sweating, as I'm sure one would do during a hike on a hot spring or sunny day, will also accidentally lure the goat to them, as these particular goats crave salt, which are found in our urine and sweat. This particular goat, however, is said to have been known for its aggressive behavior, but was only killed after it had already attacked, gored, and killed Robert Boardman. According to a park spokesman named Barb Maines, rangers had previously tried hazing the goat, which means they tried to induce it to be frightened by human beings again by shooting it with beanbags and throwing rocks at it. She claimed that though they knew the goat had been aggressive before this incident, she also stated that there were no incidents which warranted putting it down until Robert's unfortunate incident. Witnesses said that Robert, his wife, and their mutual friend were having lunch on Klahani Ridge when the goat started to approach them. It had gone unnoticed up to this point. Robert tried simply shooing away the animal, but it attacked him instead of fleeing. After goring him in the leg, which ruptured an artery, the goat simply stood over him so no one else was able to approach him until a ranger hit it with a few rocks and it turned to finally flee. Olympic mountain goats are only found in North America, and there are approximately 300 of them in this particular national park. The usual height and weight for one of these beautiful yet possibly deadly creatures is standing around 3 feet tall and weighing up to 300 pounds. Next, on Monday, May 3rd, 2021, Mason Stansfield, a 28-year-old from Ouray, Colorado, lost his life after falling into a crevice of a glacier in Denali National Park and Preserve in Alaska. Mountaineering rangers received a report from a satellite communication device that a skier had fallen into a crevice. Mason, who is an experienced skier, mountaineer, and also a mountain guide, was skiing with his partner, who reported she could not see or communicate with him once he'd fallen in, but alerted the authorities as quickly as she possibly could to try and get rescue out there before he passed away. Rescue was able to reach the scene and respond within just a half hour of the call for help going out, but unfortunately Mason died upon impact after falling and being found 100 feet below the glacier's surface. Mason's partner wasn't injured, thankfully, but she was taken to a nearby hospital just as a precaution. His remains were located that same day. A spokesman for the park stated that the accident had happened on a tributary glacier that flows into the main Eldridge Glacier. Mason had even done some mountain guide work on this same mountain in Denali before. He was a certified rock guide through the American Mountain Guide Association and had spent the last 6 years of his life working as a mountain guide out of Colorado's San Juan Range, as well as in other parts of Alaska. This just goes to show you that accidents can happen to anyone, regardless of their skill level, and you have to be not only experienced, but extremely careful and cautious whenever you're out in a place where you could end up being up against Mother Nature. In November of 2000, in Hawaii Volcanoes National Park, rangers made a horrific discovery when they came across the bodies of an unidentified man and woman who were deceased and in an advanced state of decomposition. The pair were found near a spot where lava from the Kilauea volcanic eruption flows out into the sea. When this happens, plumes of steaming white sea foam erupt into the air in a glorious show of nature. The area, which is aptly named Eruption Site, is scattered with a glassy volcanic rock called tephra. Tephra are formed and then ejected into the air, quite violently, when the more than 3,600 degree Fahrenheit, 2,000 Celsius degree, lava is sated by the seawater. The bodies were located approximately 330 feet inland from the eruption site and showed no visible signs of trauma. It was first assumed that they had been struck and killed by the flying tephra, but later on during autopsy, this was determined not to be the case. The final autopsy report was released 2 days later and showed the cause of death was actually pulmonary edema or swelling of the lungs. This was apparently due to them inhaling the hydrochloric acid fumes that come off the lava. The autopsy also showed that the advanced decomposition was due to acid rain. As the skin was either exposed to air or only covered by a single layer of clothing, it began to break down, but this was not due to the natural occurrence of post-mortem decay. All manner of toxic gases are released by the lava itself. These gases can include carbon dioxide, hydrofluoric acid, hydrogen sulfide, and sulfur dioxide. And when the lava, which releases these, interacts with the seawater, which we know is what puts it out as it flows into the waves, a bunch of other gases are produced. The highly corrosive hydrochloric acid being one of them. In the 10 years between 1992 and 2002, there were 45 serious injuries and 45 fatalities reported within Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. And this doesn't even include the minor injuries also reported in each of those years, from seemingly simple and somewhat common culprits, and also from some extremely strange and bizarre means as well. In 2002, stricter safety guidelines were implemented, and efforts to better educate tourists about safety when visiting the islands and their volcanoes were put into effect. Unfortunately, this was too little too late for this deceased pair, who still have no name to date. Next, the body of Patrick Madura, a 43-year-old man from Elgin, Illinois, was found deceased and being eaten by a black bear in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Patrick had been camping alone, but it is yet undetermined whether or not the bear had mauled and killed him, or he had died of some other cause and the bear just happened to stumble across his remains. Patrick had a backcountry camping reservation for a multi-night trip and was scheduled to stay alone in the Hazel Creek area until September 8, 2020. 3 days after he was supposed to have vacated site number 82, backpackers came across the empty tent and discovered a bear not too far away, scavenging his remains. The bear was found to be very healthy and weighing about 231 pounds. Now, the Great Smoky Mountains are the home to approximately 1,500 bears, most of which are not known to behave aggressively toward humans. On the rare occasion a bear does show a propensity for aggression and shows a high risk or threat to visitor safety, it's euthanized by Park Services. The Great Smoky Mountains National Park is visited by approximately 11 million people per year, and the park implements aversive conditioning techniques for the bears by working hard to ensure that they don't become food conditioned or habituated to high-use areas. This tragedy took place in September of 2020, and as of yet there have been no autopsy results publicly released, concluding whether or not the bear was the cause of Mr. Madura's tragic death. The bear in this case was put down by park rangers. An Israeli teenager tragically died just 2 months past his 18th birthday in Yosemite National Park in California on September 4th, 2018. Math student Tomer Frankfurter from Jerusalem was on another adventure as the outgoing teen headed to America before starting his compulsory service in the Israeli army. Tomer joined a group of other tourists who were headed to the Mist Trail. This is a rigorous 5.4-mile hiking route which takes travelers to the cliffs directly above the Nevada Falls, which is 594 feet high. After finishing the hike to the top and stopping to take in the breathtaking scenery and views from there, the group had lunch and decided to head back. This is when Tomer took off his backpack and handed it to another hiker, saying he wanted to pose for a memorable photograph before they left. He then proceeded to climb over the cliff's edge in order to take the ultimate selfie. Other hikers in the group were terrified and began shouting for Tomer not to do it and to come back away from the edge. In the blink of an eye, everything changed. Within just seconds, he was dangling hundreds of feet above the jagged and deadly rocks below. Before the others in the group could even realize something was wrong, Tomer started shouting for help. Everyone ran to his aid and tried to pull him up and back over the edge. They pulled him by his arms and wrists with all their might. However, he was unfortunately sweating profusely and slipped right out of their grasp. The group of tourists watched in horror as the young, intelligent man with his whole entire life ahead of him fell hundreds of feet to his death. Tomer had graduated early from high school and at the time of his death had already completed 2 years of college at Hebrew University in Jerusalem. He was in the United States only a visit for a few weeks and was staying with a friend who lived in Fresno, California. He had gone to the park that day with the friend he was staying with, but had somehow become separated when Tomer met up with another group of students from Israel, Germany, and a few other countries on the shuttle bus in the park. The large group of students then all decided to hike the mist trail together. Tolman had explained to these other kids that he was waiting for the perfect opportunity to duplicate a photo taken by tourists in Brazil, one they commonly take at a place there called Telegraph Rock near Rio de Janeiro. Visitors there hang from an outcropping, making it appear as though they are thousands of feet above the ground. In reality, though, these photos are taken only approximately 3 feet above a trail. It's a trick of the camera, and it's unknown whether or not Tolman was aware of this when he risked his life to duplicate the photo and take the ultimate selfie. Unfortunately, there was nothing that anyone could do. The young man had died on impact. In the 6 years between 2011 and 2017, approximately 259 people all around the world have died while attempting to take selfies. Their average age was 23, and 3/4 of them were male, according to a study published in the Journal of Family Medicine and Primary Care. The most common cause of death for these people was drowning, with most being swept into the ocean by large waves. The second was transportation accidents like being hit by a bus or train, and the third largest cause of selfie deaths was falling from extremely high heights. It was suggested by a Vietnam vet and platoon sergeant who is also an expert in hiking and a tour guide among wilderness trails in areas as diverse as Rwanda and the Grand Canyon, named Michael Giglieri, that Yosemite and other national parks update their cautions of danger with today's youth and technology in mind, perhaps even mentioning taking care and maybe even thinking twice before taking selfie photographs. The Yosemite Park Service declined to comment on Tolman's death or any part of the incident, except to say they will not be taking Giglieri's advice anytime in the near future and will not be updating their safety signs and warnings. Finally, in April of 2019, a 69-year-old woman plunged 200 feet to her death in Grand Canyon National Park. Rangers responded to a call for help on the Grand Canyon rim. However, the rescuers just couldn't get to the woman in time. Her body was found below a rocky point near Pipe Creek Vista on the south rim. A group of approximately 15 rescuers used a park helicopter to recover her remains. Cynthia Ackley lived in the Phoenix suburb of Peoria in Arizona, United States. Cynthia's was just one of the many deaths that take place due to accidental falls in not just Grand Canyon National Park, but in parks all over the country. In Cynthia's case, a rare weather event caused by warm and cold masses combining caused a total cloud inversion, which filled the entire Grand Canyon with clouds in a short amount of time, and this is what is believed to be the reason she fell so quickly and without any warning. Hello friends, welcome to our latest video. This episode we're going to be discussing Rocky Mountain disappearance and tragedies. Now, the Rocky Mountains, also known simply as the Rockies, are a major mountain range and the largest mountain system in North America. The Rocky Mountains formed 80 million to 55 million years ago during the Lauridomide orogeny, in which a number of plates began sliding underneath the North American plate. The angle of subduction was shallow, resulting in a broad belt of mountains running down western North America. Of the 100 highest peaks in the Rocky Mountains, 78, including the 30 highest, are located in Colorado, 10 in Wyoming, 6 in New Mexico, 3 in Montana, and 1 in Utah. Public parks and forest lands protect much of the mountain range, and they're very popular tourist destinations, especially for hiking, camping, mountaineering, fishing, hunting, mountain biking, snowmobiling, skiing, and snowboarding. Being in the Rocky Mountains have been said to literally make people feel like they're on top of the world, or, as John Denver sang, Rocky Mountain High. Today, though, the breathtaking views and scenic landscapes of this gorgeous mountain range aren't the reason we're bringing you this video. There is something else entirely, and something entirely sinister in what we will be discussing with you today. Bizarre and tragic deaths and disappearances in the Rockies are far too common. And because most national parks don't keep very good records of their missing and deceased, if they keep any at all, we think it necessary to review this information and a few of the very many cases like this. Between 1915, when Rocky Mountain became a national park, and 2015, a total of 344 park visitors have died as a result of accidents, car crashes, heart attacks, and various other reasons. Included in those statistics are 60 stunning fatalities associated with climbing Long's Peak in particular. While of course we can't dig into every single one of these tragedies in this short video, let's dig a little deeper into just a few of them. Here are the bizarre and strange deaths and disappearances in the Rocky Mountains. The average age for those that have died on the mountain is 32.5. The oldest person to die was 75 when he slipped on ice along the narrow section of the Keyhole route. There were also two 16-year-olds that died on that peak, one in 1932 and the other in 1980. A total of 9 victims were teenagers, which represents 15% of all deaths. This data was collected back in 2013, and as you can imagine, at least a few more deaths of teenagers have occurred at one point or another from one thing or another since then. During the first decade of the 21st century, 8 fatalities have been recorded. However, the deadliest decade was the 1970s, when the mountain claimed the lives of 13 people. Mountaineering in particular can be one of the most dangerous outdoor activities one can take part in when out in the Rockies, or on any mountain range for that matter. Despite these dangers, however, people have been climbing for thousands of years. It's the perfect thing to do if you have a great love of the outdoors and a spirit of adventure to go along with it. Some have said that while out in Mother Nature, as scenic as the views from so high above the rest of the world are, you start to realize how absolutely insignificant you are in the grand scheme of things. It's very humbling. I reiterate, however, it's also extremely dangerous, and one tiny mistake or misstep can cost you your very life. Take the case of Matthew Burklow, who on June 9, 2014, at around 2 o'clock in the morning, got into his Honda Fit and drove an hour from his home to the Longs Peak trailhead. The 25-year-old hiker planned on summiting the Front Range's most prominent 14,000-foot mountain and returning to Fort Collins in time for his afternoon shift at a King Soopers pharmacy, where he was a certified pharmacy technician. He had his whole life mapped out. He would study physics at CSU and then attend pharmaceutical school. He made the summit, but he unfortunately did not make it off the mountain alive. Matthew Burklow became the 59th fatality on Longs Peak, one of, if not the most deadly peaks in Colorado. Matthew was born and raised in Georgia, but according to his loved ones, Colorado simply stole his heart. He didn't have a cell phone as he believed he had no use for one. He didn't have credit cards either. He was building websites at the age of 8, however, and his family insisted he was a stringent planner in everything he did. So what happened on the mountain? Matthew was an experienced hiker who had recently started ice climbing and had completed the Appalachian Trail 2 years before his fatal journey. His family reported that he was a meticulous planner who treated the mountains with tremendous respect. For months, Matthew had planned the 2,160-mile Appalachian Trail trek from Georgia to Maine, how much food he needed, where he could restock supplies, how many miles a day he could manage, where he'd meet his wife Haley, who would drive from Tennessee on the weekends with fresh supplies, and they'd spend Saturday nights together. His father said of his son that anything Matthew did, he excelled at, and if he couldn't be the best at it, then it wasn't for him. Back to that fateful day in June 2014. Matthew's extensive planning and collection of the newest and best outdoor gear earned him the trail name Fancy. He climbed the 14,259-foot-tall Longs Peak alone in winter conditions that would caution hikers to include crampons, a helmet, and an ice axe. He had indeed packed all those things except for the helmet. After recovering Matthew's body, Rocky Mountain National Park search and rescue rangers investigated the fatal accident, piecing together what clues they had at their disposal. They found photos of Matthew smiling on the summit. After 2 previous unsuccessful attempts, he had reached Rocky Mountain National Park's highest point and the 14th most difficult 14er, which are peaks 14,000 feet or higher in the lingo of the climbers, among the 54 in Colorado as rated by 14ers.com. Despite the calendar showing the month of June, Longs Peak still exhibited winter conditions. On the evening of June 8th, just hours before Matthew left Fort Collins for the trailhead, Rocky Mountain National Park closed the high-elevation Trail Ridge Road due to it being covered in a new sheet of ice. About a foot of snow covered the trough, the narrows, and the ledges section of the keyhole route. And the home stretch, a steep slab of granite near the summit, had many sections slick with ice. Matthew fell from the ledges section of the mountain, a series of narrow ledges with a drop-off of 2,000 feet or more. Sadly, Matthew wasn't this particular spot's first victim either. He had already traversed the steep homestretch and the snowy narrows and had nearly reached the keyhole, the final hurdle before the simple scramble down the boulder field. It should have been easy going from there back to his vehicle, but Matthew fell, perhaps on a slick section of snow or ice, or maybe because of tired legs or a brief second of inattention. He fell approximately 600 feet, and his body was found in a rocky outcropping below the marked section of the trough. Chances of surviving a fall of that magnitude are extremely slim, said Rocky Mountain National Park East District Ranger Mark Peta. Matthew's body was flown to the helipad at Upper Beaver Meadows in Rocky Mountain National Park and transferred to the Boulder County Coroner's Office. Looking back, perhaps the most famous person to perish on the mountain was Agnes Vail. On January 25, 1925, she became the first woman to climb Long's Peak in the winter. While making her descent along the keyhole route, Vail slipped and fell about 150 feet. Exhausted and running out of steam, Agnes insisted she needed a short nap, but froze to death before her hiking partner could bring help back. Today, just below the keyhole, is the Agnes Vail Shelter. Built as a memorial to Miss Vail, the shelter also serves as a refuge for hikers and climbers in need. Another notable death occurred way back in 1889, prior to the park even being established. A man named Frank Stryker was descending down the home stretch on the keyhole route when a loaded pistol fell out of his pocket and discharged into his neck. Some say this was karma at work, as the 28-year-old was taking pleasure in launching large boulders down the mountain while climbing up himself. The newspaper account at the time said he announced his intentions of sending off a particularly huge stone just before the accident occurred. He continued to cling to life for 10 more hours while his companions attempted to transport him down the mountain on a makeshift litter. He died of his injuries shortly thereafter. Now, there is so much more statistically that we could look at to try and make sense of these senseless tragedies. Even the well-prepared and most obsessive-compulsive have accidents. Nobody goes mountain climbing or hiking expecting to never make it back home to their loved ones alive. Let's discuss some other tragedies, ones that didn't have to do with climbing. There are literally thousands of ways to die on the mountain, no matter what you're doing. Admittedly, however, being in nature and being careless is almost always a recipe for disaster. Being unprepared is also a surefire way to get yourself in trouble out there in the woods. What about the unexplained? This video wouldn't be a complete video if we didn't mention at least one of the more strange and bizarre unexplained deaths that happened in the Rockies. Take the mysterious disappearance of Keith Reinhardt. Keith was a sports reporter at the Daily Herald in Chicago in 1988 when he announced he'd be taking the next 90 days off to fulfill his lifelong dream to spend some time living in the Rocky Mountains. In a letter he wrote to a friend, Keith stated, "I love these mountains and want to live in them before I die." So he took off for Silver Plume, Colorado, a small mining town of 200 that sits inside the Arapahoe National Forest at the foot of the Rocky Mountains. Ironically, and more than just a little eerily, Keith had another reason for wanting to visit this particular tiny little mining town. In addition to fulfilling his one dream, he was also hoping to achieve another. This was to write a novel about the disappearance of Tom Young. Tom was another man who just happened to have disappeared from that same exact mining town, but in September of 1987. He immediately opened an antique store in the building which used to house Tom Young's bookstore. He wanted to get a feel for Tom's life so he could more easily and authentically write about him. Late one afternoon, severely hungover from a previous night of heavy drinking and having fun, Keith Reinhardt went to hike Pendleton Mountain and never returned. More than 100 people logged over 10,000 hours searching and never found a clue as to what had happened to him. Sometimes the answer is, there is no answer, Reinhardt's widow, Carolyn O'Donnell, told the Daily Herald in 2008. Sometimes there really isn't. Not that any answer could ever be satisfactory enough, surely, for the deceased person's loved ones. To have to reconcile yourself to the fact that someone so important to you and that you love so much is gone and never to return again must be hard enough. But to have to make sense out of the fact that somewhere so incredibly beautiful, scenic, and mostly peaceful and serene is the cause of that person's demise. It boggles the mind and has to be quite unbearable. So, in closing, make sure when out in the woods, even if you're just camping or if you are hiking, climbing, etc., whether in the national parks or even in your own backyard, that you're well prepared and careful. If you absolutely must go alone, always be sure to tell at least one other person where you're going and when you expect to be back. A lot of people even go so far as to give a time that if they haven't yet returned, that the authorities are to be called. You can find so many safety tips online these days, so please do your own research before going out into the wilderness. Hello friends, Steve Stockton here with you. Welcome to our latest video. In today's episode, we're going to look at hikers who mysteriously vanished in Hawaii. Let's go walk and see. Now, when we think of people mysteriously vanishing, especially when they're hikers in the woods, we almost automatically think of some dark, deserted, and densely wooded place in the bowels of some national park or forest somewhere. Even when we think of gorgeous places where we know people vanished, where the woods are lush with trees, the views are scenic, and the atmosphere is serene, we don't really consider that these places are the exact spots where most of our hikers and campers, our missing in the woods in general, go missing. But in this video, we're discussing such a place where it is so incredibly beautiful to behold and peaceful to be near, but where hikers have gone mysteriously missing and seem to have vanished right off the face of the earth. More specifically, we are speaking of hikers who vanished in Hawaii. There's so little information on each of the following cases, it kind of makes a person wonder why the publicity is so light for people vanishing in this part of the world. First up, Joseph Wyatt. On Thursday, February 3rd, 2022, 23-year-old Joseph Wyatt left his home with his dog, Manna, to go on a short camping trip. He was never seen again. After not hearing anything from him for 2 whole days, his live-in girlfriend called the authorities and reported him as missing. Joseph and his dog were said to have been planning on camping out near Nakalele Point, which in Hawaiian means the leaning, is known for being dangerous when waves come crashing in, and it's a hot spot because people go there to experience and view its blowhole. His family had asked the public to keep their eyes out for him, and many volunteers helped in the search efforts along with the authorities, including the Maui Police and Fire Department. The official search only lasted a couple of days and then, for reasons unknown, was suddenly called off. Joseph's family created a Facebook page, and anyone with any information was asked to please call 808-244-6400. And for those wondering, Manna, the dog, was never found either. Next up, Simon Owen. Simon Owen had just completed his junior year at Texas Wesleyan University when he disappeared without a trace on June 6, 1994. Simon lived in Fort Worth, Texas, and was visiting Hawaii specifically to do some hiking. He was last seen near Manoa Falls, approximately 8.5 miles from Waikiki. Only his bicycle was found at the very bottom of the falls, but it was said he was also most likely carrying a maroon book bag with him, which was also never found. The local authorities searched extensively, and even billionaire Ross Perot got involved, donating funds and whatever else was needed to continue with the search. Despite all this, and also the help of dozens of volunteers, no trace of Simon was ever found. At the time of his disappearance, he was working in a restaurant in Waikiki in Hawaii. The police have maintained that foul play is not suspected in the disappearance and have given the alternate theory that perhaps Simon had accidentally fallen into some deep valley pocket where he would never be found or seen alive again. By all accounts, Simon Owen was simply taking some time off from his studies and trying to hike the beautiful and scenic areas of Hawaii's popular tourist and hiking spots. He didn't seem to have gone off the beaten trail, so what could have possibly happened to him? Simon was born October 9, 1972, and at the time of his disappearance, he was 22 years old. Now, in 2022, he would be 50 years old. He was 6 feet tall and weighed 155 pounds. Simon has brown hair, brown eyes, and a tattoo of what's described as an encircled fish on his right ankle, along with some scars on the back of his neck, his right hip, and his right shoulder. If you have any information on what may have happened to Simon Owen all those years ago, please contact the Honolulu Police Department at 808-529-3394. Next up, Moses Gardner. On Sunday, May 8, 2022, a 50-year-old man named Moses Gardner went missing while hiking in the Kokes near Miloli Ridge. Moses is a Lowai resident, and there's absolutely no other information available on this case. This is why we're bringing these cases to you folks. Shouldn't there at least be a little bit more information available to the public about these random men, these hikers, who all seem to have vanished without a trace somewhere in Hawaii? Yet there's nothing but a paragraph each, 2 if we're lucky. And to us, that's a tragedy in and of itself. What's going on over there in the Aloha state? Aloha means both hello and goodbye, and it seems these people who have randomly disappeared experience both of these things. Anywhere else in the world, at least as far as what we've covered here, there's at least a few pages of information and more than one source. But here, there's nothing. And again, that's very concerning to us. Here's another hiker gone missing in this beautiful, scenic, almost paradise-like state. Thomas Lockhart. A 61-year-old California native named Thomas Lockhart went missing on May 1st, 2022, when at approximately 6:30 in the evening Hawaii time, he went out for a jog in the Pipawa Trails, which is located in the Haleakala National Park. He was last seen, though it's unknown by whom, before his jog where he was staying at the Kipahulu Valley Farm and was reported as missing by his family the next day, May 2nd, when he never returned and no one heard anything from him since he left. Search efforts started immediately and were suspended overnight, only to be continued the next day, Tuesday, May 3rd, but to no avail. His family traveled from California to Hana to help in the search for him and pleaded with the public to share any video they might have facing the road in Hana if they saw anyone who was matching Thomas's description. At the time of his disappearance, Thomas Lockhart is said to have weighed approximately 165 pounds and stood 6 feet tall. He had graying brown hair. Anyone with any information or any of the above-mentioned video evidence is asked to send it via email to the family at findtomlockhart@gmail.com, or you can call 325-261-3189. Next, Kyle Britton. On August 30th, 2019, 27-year-old Kyle Britton was visiting the forests of Waipio Valley in Hawaii. He told friends he was going to be hiking the Waipio Valley Z Trail, but that he wasn't going to be hiking the entire trail that day. Kyle had been hiking since he was a small child and was considered to be an experienced hiker by everyone who knew him. Waipio Valley is a valley located in the Hamakua district of the Big Island of Hawaii. Waipio means curved water in the Hawaiian language. The Z Trail, nicknamed because of the route's zigzag shape, climbs 1,200 feet to the top of a ridge before descending into the Waimanu Valley. The first 3/4 of a mile is very strenuous switchbacks, and near the top there's a lookout or the great view of the Waipio Valley. This is a trail that you absolutely should not attempt if you're a novice hiker. Once you reach the top of the ridge, it's another 8 miles of hiking through gorges and over hills to reach Waimanu Valley. Hikers are warned not to attempt to do this hike in a single day, as you need to cross 13 streams along the way. It is also not advised during the rainy season, where large amounts of mud and swollen streams make the trek even more dangerous. The descent into Waimanu can be extremely difficult and treacherous. Kyle's father, Stephen Britton, explained that there was another hiker who came forward and claimed to have last seen his son near a bathroom at the Waipio Valley Overlook at around 6 p.m. the day he disappeared. Stephen said, he asked where the bathroom was and said, "Hey, have a good day." And that was the last time. After 24 days of extensive searches but no clues or leads, on September 22, 2019, Kyle's family made the heartbreaking decision to call off the search for him. His cell phone last pinged at the top of the Z Trail, and this was most likely a lucky break as cell phone service is extremely bad in that particular area of the Waipio Valley. Stephen Britton said of his cell phone records, "Some of this data is open to interpretation, especially when only one cell phone tower is involved. No triangulation is possible with only one cell tower. There are degrees of reliability and probability involved. The farther you get from the one tower, the less reliable the data is." Kyle's brothers Cade and Sean were involved in helping to analyze the cell phone data, but it still led nowhere, and Kyle Britton has never been seen or heard from again. At the time of his disappearance, he was said to be of a slim build with black hair, brown eyes, and fair skin. He stood 5 feet 10 inches tall, and on the day of his final hike, He was wearing a black backpack which had a T-Mobile logo on it. His car was recovered after it was found parked at the top of the YPO lookout. There were no further clues or evidence in the vehicle, and this case remains open to this day. Next, Kiara Henry. On July 21st, 2019, the 23-year-old Kiara Henry went missing while taking a vacation in Maui for just a few days, though it's unknown what she was doing there specifically except taking a short trip. Another California native, Kiara was from San Diego and was in Hawaii staying at a hotel in Kihei for a brief vacation. She was last seen at a Hertz rental car company at approximately 2 p.m. on the 21st. The vehicle she rented was found 2 days later, July 23rd, in a gravel parking lot at Waianapanapa State Park. All of her luggage, her credit card, and her license were still in the car. Kiara's backpack, which she had with her when she was last seen, and the key to the car were missing and have never been found. After checking the mileage on the car, it seems as though she drove directly to the park where the vehicle was found from the Hertz location where she rented it. She's seen on CCTV footage at the rental company, but this is the last time anyone is known to have seen her alive. She never boarded her flight home on the 29th, and her family continues to make frequent trips to the island, despite there being no clues or leads as to what could have happened to this young woman who was always in touch with her family. They say they will never give up the search, and they know something is wrong because Kiara would never be out of touch for this long. Kiara is around 5'2" to 5'3" inches tall and is enrolled as a member of the Sakuan band of the Kumeyaay Nation. Kiara has brown hair and brown eyes and has both her ears and nose pierced, although she was not known to be wearing any of her nose jewelry at the time of her disappearance. On her upper right arm, she has a tattoo of sunflowers and praying hands above her right elbow. And finally, we have Jeffrey Zoltowski. 23-year-old Michigan resident and Wayne University student Jeffrey Zoltowski went missing on March 31st, 1993, while hiking into Wailau Valley on Molokai in Hawaii. When his feet became blistered from walking so much during the hike, he managed to flag down a helicopter that belonged to the Department of Land and Natural Resources because he didn't feel as though he would be able to make it back home on his own. Unfortunately, according to the pilot, he did not see this as a, quote, life-threatening situation, unquote, and therefore made the demand that in order for him to help Jeffrey and fly him out of the area, the young man would have to cough up $600 right then and there. Obviously, Jeffrey was not carrying this kind of cash with him while on a hike and begged the pilot to help him. The pilot turned him away and left him there to fend for himself. The pilot did take Jeffrey's backpack for him, saying he figured it would help him get back easier than if he had to carry it with him. He took the pack to the DLNR service yard, where it was later recovered by authorities. Jeffrey Zoltowski was never seen or heard from again, and after his bag had been at the service yard for a whopping 41 days, he was finally reported by someone there as missing. There was a possible and alleged sighting of him when, in 2001, a homeless woman claimed to have seen Jeffrey several times panhandling near a homeless shelter in Honolulu. She described him as having heavy facial hair and facial scarring, walking with a limp, and having slurred speech. She claimed the man said his name was either Sam or Samuel, but none of this was ever able to be substantiated, and there's still no evidence to this day as to whether or not this man was indeed Jeffrey Zoltowski. His case remains unsolved, and his father has never given up searching for him. At the time of his disappearance, Jeff was 6 feet tall and weighed about 160 pounds. He is described as a Caucasian male with brown hair and brown eyes. On his right outer ankle bone, he has a birthmark which is about the size of a nickel or a quarter. He also has a scar underneath his right eye. It's possible he has some sort of facial hair like a mustache, beard, or goatee. He's left-handed and goes by the name Jeff. He had previously fractured his left hand and ankle. He was last officially seen wearing white shorts and a purple tie-dyed t-shirt. The information given by the woman in 2001 led some to believe that if the man was indeed Jeff Zoltowski, he most likely suffered some sort of head injury in the past and may be unaware of who he actually is. It was also claimed that he was seen asking vehicles stopped in traffic near that same homeless shelter by a Kmart and asking for change. There's no further evidence or clues as to Jeff's whereabouts, but his family continues to hope for his safe return. Hello friends, and welcome to another episode. In this video, we bring you 15 strange disappearances from Yosemite National Park in California. Yosemite is America's second most visited national park, receiving 4 to 5 million visitors per year. behind only the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, which averages around 12 million visitors per year. Yosemite is a glorious wilderness, best known for its waterfalls, but within its nearly 1,200 square miles, you can find deep valleys, grand meadows, ancient giant sequoias, and so much more. People come here to hike, to climb, to just enjoy nature. However, there is a dark side to Yosemite. On average, Yosemite has the highest number of reported missing persons of any national park, with about 40 per year, or one for every 100,000 visitors. Here are just a few of what we consider to be the strangest disappearances. Peter Jackson. 74-year-old Peter Jackson is believed to have gone for a day hike from his campsite at White Wolf Campground, but he never returned. He had sent a text message to his son saying that he was on his way to the park on September 17, 2016. His vehicle was found at the campground, and camping fees were paid through September 21st of that year. An extensive search of the park, involving helicopters, dogs, and dozens of volunteers, turned up no indication of Peter's whereabouts. On October 2, 2016, the search for Peter was placed in continuous limited mode. In August of 2019, Peter's backpack was found in the Ackerson Meadow, Aspen Valley area on the west side of Yosemite National Park. Other than that, Peter has not been seen or heard from since his disappearance, and his case remains unsolved. Walter H. Reinhardt. 66-year-old Walter Reinhardt went missing on September 19, 2002. His car was found at White Wolf Trailhead, suggesting to investigators he went for a hike. It is not known what he was wearing, although he often hiked with a large fanny pack. An extensive search of the park, involving helicopters, dogs, and dozens of volunteers, turned up no indication of Walter's whereabouts. Walter has not been seen or heard from since his disappearance, and his case remains unsolved. Ruth Ann Rupert. 49-year-old Ruth Ann Rupert was last seen in the Curry Village area, or the Yosemite Medical Clinic, at about noon on Monday, August 14, 2000. She was scheduled to go on a backpacking trip in the park, but had to postpone the trip due to an infection. She is believed to have gone on a day hike from Yosemite Falls to the Foresta area, based on witnesses' observations. An extensive search of the park, involving helicopters, dogs, and dozens of volunteers, turned up no indication of Ruth Ann's whereabouts. 8 years later, in 2008, Ruth Ann's backpack was found in the Fireplace Creek drainage, an area consistent with the hiking route from Yosemite Falls to Foresta. Ruth Ann has not been seen or heard from since her disappearance, and her case remains unsolved. Kieran Burke. 45-year-old Kieran Burke was visiting from Dublin, Ireland, on a hiking trip in April of 2000. He was discovered missing on April 6, 2000, when park staff noticed he hadn't checked out of his lodging. He was last seen the day before at Curry Village, possibly on his way to hike alone. His family said he was an experienced hiker. However, an extensive search of the park, involving helicopters, dogs, and dozens of volunteers, turned up no indication of Kieran's whereabouts. Kieran has not been seen or heard from since his disappearance, and his case remains unsolved. David Paul Morrison. 28-year-old David Paul Morrison was last seen in Little Yosemite Valley in Yosemite National Park at 7:15 a.m. on May 25, 1998. He disappeared while hiking to Half Dome and has never been heard from again. Although David was considered an experienced hiker, he wasn't equipped for an overnight trip at the time of his disappearance. Neither was he dressed for the cold and wet weather. An extensive search of the park, including helicopters, dogs, and dozens of volunteers, turned up no indication of David's whereabouts. David has not been seen or heard from since his disappearance, and his case remains unsolved. Timothy John Barnes. 25-year-old Timothy Barnes was a resident of Cucamonga, California in 1988. He left Tenaya Lakes near Highway 120 east of Tioga Road in California at approximately 9 a.m. on July 5, 1988. Timothy planned to hike from the Murphy Creek Trailhead to Poly Dome Lakes in Yosemite National Park, which is located approximately 3 miles from Tenaya Lakes. He was supposed to return by 4:30 p.m., but never showed up and has never been seen or heard from again. Timothy's friends report him as missing person to Park Service rangers the following morning. An extensive search of the area failed to produce any evidence as to his whereabouts, and Timothy was declared legally dead on July 19, 1990, 2 years after his disappearance. His remains have never been found. Stacy Ann Arras. 14-year-old Stacy Arras was last seen while visiting Yosemite National Park with her father and 6 others on July 27, 1981. The group reached a cluster of cabins designed for overnight stay at Sunrise High Sierra Camp, tied up their horses, and went indoors to freshen up. Stacy changed clothes and left the cabin, carrying her camera so she could photograph the lake. Stacy invited her father to join her, but he declined, and an elderly man from the group went with her instead. They went downhill towards the lake, and the rest of the group watched them from above. They saw Stacy's companions sit down. Stacy walked further on towards the lake, then went behind some trees and disappeared from sight. After a few minutes, when she didn't return, the other members of the group went to look for her. An extensive search of the park involving helicopters, dogs, and dozens of volunteers turned up no indication of Stacy's whereabouts. The only trace ever found of her was the lens cap from her camera around the tree line area where she was last seen. Stacy has not been seen or heard from since her disappearance, and her case remains unsolved. Dekran Nadjan. 20-year-old Dekran Nadjan was last seen at Camp Curry Village in Yosemite National Park in California on July 24, 1972. He asked the registration desk attendant how to get to Half Dome and has never been seen or heard from again. At the time of his disappearance, he was a medical student at Cambridge University in England. He was vacationing in the U.S. with plans to visit Florida after his stay at Yosemite. An extensive search of the park involving dogs, helicopters, and dozens of volunteers turned up no trace of Dekran's whereabouts. He has not been seen or heard from since his disappearance, and his case remains unsolved. Matthew Green. 39-year-old Matthew Green was last heard from on July 16, 2013, when he called his parents and an automotive repair shop to check on progress and exchange text messages with friends. Matthew was a high school mathematics teacher in Nazareth, Pennsylvania, and lived in Bethlehem, and was a very experienced hiker and outdoorsman. Matthew arrived in the area of the eastern Sierra Mountains in Yosemite National Park on June 27, 2013, to climb with friends. But when his Subaru car broke down, they continued on while he stayed behind at a campground called Shady Rest near Mammoth Lake to wait for repairs. The last contact was on July 16, when he called his parents and the car repair shop to check on progress and exchange text messages with some of his friends. At the campsite, authorities found some of his gear missing and a guidebook with pages torn out of it. Friends said he often tore out the pages for hikes he wanted to go on, and when he completed them, he would put them back in his book. In this case, the pages were from the Minarat area, including Mount Ritter and Mount Banner, but Green didn't sign his name on either summit's log. His friends returned to the campsite on July 17th, and he was nowhere to be seen. They had discovered that his car had been repaired, but he never picked it up, and he hadn't returned to the Shady Rest campground for over a week. The Mammoth Lake Police Department was informed. Several of Matthew's friends flew to California and canvassed bus drivers, store owners, librarians, and others in Mammoth Lakes, posted flyers at trailheads, checked summit registers, and spent several days in the backcountry looking for clues. The search has gone airborne, too, with a helicopter flying over the rugged terrain and one of Green's friends shooting high-resolution video from a private plane. California search and rescue personnel have also volunteered their time. Despite this extensive search, no trace of Matthew was found. Michael Fickery. 51-year-old Michael Fickery was reported missing when he did not return home from a 4-day hike. On June 15, 2005, Michael, an avid, experienced hiker and backpacker, visited the north side of the Hetch Hetchy Reservoir in Yosemite National Park for a solo hike. He had planned this hike to take him to Rancheria Falls, Telltale Mountain, Lake Vernon, and then through Beehive before returning back to the Hetch Hetchy Reservoir. At some point during the day, he decided to begin walking to the north up to the Pacific Crest Trail towards Telltale Mountain. His family became concerned when he did not return by June 19th, 4 days after Mike went on his hike and when his wilderness permit expired. On June 21st, they called the Park Service and an intensive search of the area around the reservoir and Pacific Crest Trail was launched. However, all that was found was a backpack near Telltale Mountain just off the trail, containing a topographical map, a camera, and a bottle of water. The search and rescue operation involved personnel from 5 counties with aircraft and tracker dogs. Apart from the pack, nothing else was found. Nearly 15 years later, Michael remains missing. George Pinka. 30-year-old George Pinka disappeared on July 17, 2011, while hiking at the Upper Yosemite Falls in Yosemite National Park. George was from Hawthorne, California, and was visiting the national park with his church group of 80 people, of which around 20 people were walking the Upper Yosemite Fall Trail that day. The group separated at the top, with the hikers going back down at their own pace. George likely fell behind the main group. George's friends assumed he had hiked back to the Yosemite Valley floor earlier and didn't report him missing until 9 p.m. George completely vanished off the trail. He was last seen wearing gray sweatpants with white stripes, a black t-shirt that says D&B across the chest, or a black tank top and gray-blue running shoes. He was carrying a blue cloth bag and some limited food and water. Initial search efforts began that same evening, and a full-scale search and rescue operation was initiated on Saturday morning, June 18th. Around 105 search and rescue personnel from around the state were deployed, along with helicopters and 6 search dogs, including Yosemite National Park Search and Rescue, Inyo County, Mono County, Mariposa County, Marin County, Fresno County, Tuolumne County, China Lake, Los Angeles County, Nevada County, Sierra Madre, Yosemite Search and Rescue dog teams, Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks, and California Explorer Search and Rescue. On June 23, 2011, search efforts transitioned to a limited continuous search. After nearly 1 week of extensive searching, park rangers did not find any clues as to George's whereabouts. In nearly 9 years since George vanished, none of his belongings have turned up and George remains missing. Joel Thomason. 31-year-old Joel Thomason went on a solo hike in Yosemite National Park, telling friends of his plans to hike from Hetch Hetchy to then fish in Lake Eleanor and then return to Hetch Hetchy. He began on the 6th of September 2021 and was due back on the 9th. Joel is described as a white male standing 5 feet 10 inches tall with hazel eyes and brown hair worn buzzed short. Park officials noted that he may have decided to stay out longer and extend his trip to Cherry Lake to the north or east as far as the Grand Canyon of the Tuolumne River. Park officials are asking all wilderness travels north of Tioga Road and between Cherry Lake and Tuolumne Meadows to report possible sightings of him or any unattended or possibly abandoned equipment. They added that he was likely carrying the kayak packed in a large red pouch attached to the exterior of his backpack. His family provided this list of additional equipment he may have had with him, which includes a floppy boonie hat, a dark blue or gray hammock, large yellowish tan caddy pack, U.S. Army steel cup dated 1918, camelback type red and black day pack, a black and yellow collapsible sink, a bright red inflatable kayak, a small collapsible stove in a black bag, a kayak paddle, a Petzl Zipka headlamp, a yellow bear can, a Garmin Tactics Delta Solar GPS watch, a bright green mummy-style sleeping bag, and a fishing pole with other fishing gear. He was wearing tan or blue zip-off pants. Richard Judd. Richard and a still unidentified hiking partner were camped near Lower Merced Pass Lake when they went on a day hike towards Lower Ottawa Lake and Red Peak Pass on Sunday, according to the National Park Service and the Madera County Sheriff's Office. They got separated from each other somewhere between Lower Merced Pass Lake and Lower Ottawa Lake. Lower Merced Pass Lake is about 15 miles from Happy Isle, the trailhead where people can start the Mist Trail and hike to the Half Dome cables. The hike from Lower Merced Pass Lake to Red Peak Pass is about 3.5 miles. A vehicle belonging to Judd or his hiking partner was parked at the Quartz Mountain Trailhead in the Sierra National Forest and outside Yosemite National Park, about 23 miles south of Lower Merced Pass Lake. Authorities described Richard as being 5 feet 11 inches tall, 150 pounds, with brown eyes, short gray hair, and a beard. He was last seen wearing a blue shirt and gray or blue pants. His last known location was in the Yosemite backcountry, about 15 miles from the popular Trailhead Junction at Happy Isle on the Merced River. Ralph Elliott. 51-year-old Ralph Elliott was last seen on April 22, 2021, after he left for a day hike in Yosemite National Park, California. Sadly, there's very little information about Ralph's case, but his story is still important, and it is important that we keep his case alive. According to the Fresno Bee newspaper, Ralph was intending to hike to the Yosemite Fall Overlook and Eagle Peak in the Yosemite National Park. Authorities are concerned for his well-being, and the Park Service are noted as saying that they believe he may be in a state of emotional distress and capable of harming himself. The Yosemite Park Service has declined to comment on why they believe that Ralph is in such a state of emotional distress, but they have asked anyone who comes into contact with him to bear this in mind. Ralph Elliott is described as a white male with a muscular build, 5 foot 8 inches tall, with blue eyes, a beard, and long graying hair. Sandra Johnson Hughes. 54-year-old Sandra Johnson Hughes of California was last heard from on June 26, 2020. Sandra had embarked on a solo camping trip in the Sierra, south of Yosemite, to escape from the current pandemic. Sandra had recently moved from Maui, Hawaii to California in June of 2020. She had trained to be a park ranger in college and was experienced in the outdoors. On July 5th of that year, the Madera County Sheriff's Office asked for the public's help in locating Sandra after they found her campsite near the Johnson's Meadow section of the forest in disarray. On that same day, the authorities located Hughes' silver Saab in Chiquito Creek to the north of the campsite. They said it appeared to have crashed into a tree at a speed of less than 20 miles per hour before rolling into the ravine. Hikers reported seeing Sandra on July 4th, 2020, and said she was barefoot and had a bruise on her face. They offered to help her, but she declined medical assistance. Officers and volunteer search and rescue teams from more than half a dozen other sheriff's departments, together with dog teams, the California Highway Patrol, and the Governor's Office of Emergency Services, combed the forest on foot, while helicopters from California Air National Guard did an aerial search. The search focused around the area where her car was found, but there was no sign of Sandra. Then on August 9th, 2020, 2 hunters saw a woman leaning against a tree along Road 5S01 near Beasore Road. She did not wave them down, attempt contact, or appear to be in any distress. Upon returning, they recognized her from a missing persons flyer and contacted park rangers. The hunters said that she appears to be visibly thinner than her last known photos. At the time of her disappearance, Sandra was a 54-year-old white female with blue shoulder-length hair. Her natural color is brown. She has brown eyes, is approximately 5 foot 3 inches tall, and weighs about 150 pounds. The search for Sandra was ongoing but limited. Now, flash forward to almost exactly 1 year later. This strange update to the case comes from the Madera County Sheriff's Office in Madera, California. It seems that a family from nearby Coarsegold, California, experienced a bizarre broad daylight ghost sighting in the Madera County mountains on Wednesday, July 21st, 2021. The event was so strange and disturbing that the Madera County Sheriff's Office felt the need to further investigate. It seems that a man named Jake Gorba, his wife Victoria, and their 3 children decided to take their four-wheeler up to the Shut-Eye Peak on that fateful Wednesday. While on this family outing, they stopped to have something to eat beside the trail, and that's when things started to get strange. The couple's 3-year-old son, Caden, suddenly began animatedly talking to someone nearby. He was just in our four-wheeler, and he was pointing out to a certain spot in the meadow, said his mom, Victoria. The normally reserved and somewhat quiet Caden excitedly told his parents that there in the meadow by where the family was having lunch was a woman lying face down with her legs straight up in the air. Furthermore, Caden stated that the woman was unable to speak or move and needed help. He began pleading with his parents to help this poor woman. He flat out told us, "Mom, she's already dead, but she needs our help." And that's when I got the goosebumps. I was like, "Oh my gosh," Victoria said. He goes, "Yeah, there's a lady over in the meadow in a black shirt, blue jeans, and blue hair." And I got goosebumps, said Victoria. He says, "She needs our help, but she's dead, and she's lying face down with her legs up. She can't talk to me, but she's over there. We need to go help her." So, in order to calm young Caden down, Jake and Victoria walked over and checked out the meadow, but saw absolutely nothing. Caden continued to insist. He kept saying, trust me, Mom." And I was like, I trust you. I believe you 100%, said Victoria. Whatever young Caden was experiencing so unnerved and spooked the rest of the family that the other members of the family all unanimously agreed it's time to put an early end to their day of adventure and make the 35-mile drive back home to Corsko. After arriving home, the event still fresh in her mind, Victoria decided to post about the weird encounter on her Facebook profile. We put it on Facebook to see if anybody knew anything about this area, and come to find out, there was a lady missing with a description that he described to us within a 5-mile radius of where we were, said Victoria. Now, as viewers of this channel know from our previous episode number 7, Sandra Hughes had gone missing in that area in June of 2020. The encounter became even more chilling when, according to Victoria, 3-year-old Caden's highly detailed description of the woman he had seen in the meadow was identical to the description of Sandra Hughes as given by the local authorities. He was very adamant that we needed to help her, and he described her down to blue hair. He said she has a black shirt, blue jeans, and blue hair, Mom. That's the exact description of her when she went missing, said Victoria. Then Victoria went and searched online for Sandra Hughes and found some photographs that had been released as a part of the search effort the year prior. Victoria said she got goosebumps when Caden readily recognized 3 of the photos of Sandra, identifying her as the woman he had seen in the field. As fate would have it, Madera County Sheriff Corporal Chris Williams just happened to see the Facebook post and found it intriguing, to say the least. So much so that he contacted Caden's family to further investigate the chilling account. Victoria said the corporal in charge of her case actually reached out to us on Facebook and was like, "Hey, we want more information and we want to bring you guys back up there and see if you could point us in the right direction." Corporal Williams has been investigating the disappearance of Sandra Hughes since the beginning of the investigation. On the following Thursday, 2 Madera County Sheriff's deputies ventured back up to the meadow to investigate, with Jake and Caden coming along to point them in the right direction. Unfortunately, the deputies found nothing new by way of evidence, although the case remains open. If she was possibly a ghost looking for some help, I hope that he could have at least helped and maybe helped the family find her, because it's been a long time apparently since she's been gone, Victoria said. The 4-wheeler that Caden and his family used while traveling in the mountains has now been nicknamed the Ghost Runner, and incidentally is also for sale. It's not believed that the spooky encounter is the reason they put the vehicle up for sale, as the family says they will continue to go adventuring in the Madera Mountains, but do admit there are a few spots now which they aren't anxious to visit again anytime soon, if at all. Local news reporters in the area reached out to the Madera County Sheriff's Office, who did confirm that they received a report of a possible sighting of some sort, and they did go out to the location to search for any additional leads or information. Hello friends, welcome to our latest video. Today we're going to be talking about missing hikers who were found years later. Join us. Now, in the world of the missing, many times the family of the victims never get any answers. And sometimes the answers they get haunt them for the rest of their days. There are times, though, when the answers suddenly appear, years later, as if out of clear blue sky. Here are just some of those cases where a loved one went for a hike or a walk and seemed to vanish right off the face of the earth, only to leave behind no clue as to where they may have gone. Years later, however, suddenly there were answers. Someone else walking along somewhere in the woods came across something horrifying: human remains. First case, Rudy Motor. Skeletal remains found on the west side of the Rocky Mountain National Park are believed to be those of a man who disappeared 38 years ago. On February 13, 1983, 38-year-old Rudy Motor departed the Zimmerman Lake Trailhead on Colorado Highway 17 near Cameron Pass for a 2 to 3 night ski mountaineering trip over Thunder Pass and into Rocky Mountain National Park. Rudy was originally from West Germany, but was currently living in Fort Collins at the time of his disappearance. He was described as an experienced winter mountaineer and was said to be very knowledgeable of the trails he somehow ended up lost on. This is what made it all the more baffling when on February 19th, 6 days after he'd initially set out on a 3-night trip over Thunder Pass and into Rocky Mountain National Park, he was said to be overdue by his roommate, who immediately reported him as missing to the proper authorities. Further investigation and search operations started the very next day, early in the morning on the 20th. Over a foot of snow fell in the Never Summer Mountains on February 19th, hampering search efforts in finding tracks and other clues. A food cache belonging to Motor was found at the mouth of Box Canyon in the northwest corner of the park. A snow cave with Motor's sleeping bag and other gear and items was found near the food cache. These were the only major clues discovered during the 4-day extensive search. Because Rudy's Point, last seen, was outside of Rocky Mountain National Park at the Zimmerman Lake trailhead, the extensive search efforts were coordinated with Larimer County Search and Rescue and Rocky Mountain National Park Search and Rescue teams. Search efforts occurred mainly in the Box Canyon and Skeleton Gulch areas, including Mount Richtofen. This included ground searches on skis and snowshoes, as well as aerial search operations. There was even an avalanche dog and his handler there to bring a more professional focus to the avalanche terrain in the area. The extensive search efforts continued for 4 days and ended on February 23rd. However, there were numerous search efforts by ground and air that occurred later that spring and summer. In the decades following Rudy Motor's disappearance, search efforts continued periodically by Rocky Mountain National Park staff and Larimer County Search and Rescue teams. In mid-August of 2020, skeletal remains were discovered by a hiker in the Skeleton Gulch area near avalanche debris. The area where the remains were found were part of the initial search area. An investigation was initially conducted, but it seems the rangers and authorities involved got a bit sidetracked, and their priorities shifted to the Cameron Peak fire closing the area, followed by the East Troublesome fire. Snow then covered this high elevation area above 11,000 feet. In the summer of 2021, park rangers further searched the scene and found skis, poles, and boots, along with the remains of personal items believed to belong to Rudy Motor. The FBI Evidence Response Team assisted park rangers with the recovery of the remains. The Grand County Coroner's Office attempted to confirm identification through dental records. However, the results were inconclusive. Officials have worked extensively with the German government for repatriation of the remains, family notification, and dental record analysis. The discovery and recovery of Rudy Motor's remains closes out a nearly 4-decade-long cold case at Rocky Mountain National Park. Next, we have Rachel Lacoduc. 28-year-old Rachel Lacoduc of Moses Lake went missing on October 17, 2019, after telling her family she planned to hike the Hidden Lake Trail to a lookout cabin and spend the night to celebrate her birthday. During the initial search, Rachel's car was found at the trailhead, but search crews reported that it didn't appear she made it to the lookout tower. According to a GoFundMe created by her family, the weather turned inclement when Rachel was out for her hike and she wasn't able to make it off the mountain. Over the weekend of August 14, 2021, her remains were found by a large search group who were still out searching for her 2 years later. Her mother, Elizabeth Tripp, posted to her Facebook the Monday after the discovery, "Our beloved Rachel's remains arrived off the mountain yesterday." Next, we have Geraldine Largay. 66-year-old Geraldine Largay from Brentwood, Tennessee, started her journey in April of 2013 at Harper's Ferry, West Virginia. She had committed to a through hike of the 2,168-mile Appalachian Trail and had already traversed more than 1,000 miles. She gained the trail name Inchworm due to her perpetually slow pace. She was last seen on July 22nd, where she talked with 2 women at a lean-to, a sheltered stopping point. She planned to hike 8.4 miles north that day and then continue the next day to a point where the trail crossed a road. Geraldine was a retired Air Force nurse who had hiked long trails near her home in Tennessee and had taken a course on doing this particular trail. She easily made friends both on and off the trail. Her husband was supposed to meet her there as he was meeting her weekly to restock her supplies. He waited and waited, but unfortunately, Geraldine never showed. Hundreds of people and several dogs searched for her. There were few clues to be found. The only clear clue investigators had was a photo of her, taken early the morning she went missing, near a log lean-to whose 3 walls are covered by a corrugated tin roof with a fire pit nearby. She was last seen by 2 hikers, and her cell phone pinged a tower the afternoon she got lost. She was initially traveling with a friend named Jane Lee, but Jane had to leave the trip early and go home due to what was only described as a family emergency. She immediately had some concerns, however, about leaving Geraldine to hike by herself the rest of the way. Geraldine was known to have a terrible sense of direction and had already taken several wrong turns. Because she moved at a much faster pace than Geraldine, several times Jane Lee had to double back for her friend, who at least once had wandered off and gotten lost. Jane found her trying to find someone to set her back on course. It's said that Jane admitted she felt that Geraldine was in over her head and trying to complete the rest of the journey solo. It turns out, though, that Geraldine Largay had been writing in her journal every day of her trip and continued to do so right up until the very end. Her final entries showed her to be resigned to her inevitable fate. Her last journal entry read, "When you find my body, please call my husband George and daughter Carrie. It will be the greatest kindness for them to know that I'm dead and where you found me, no matter how many years from now. Please find it in your heart to mail the contents of this bag to one of them." She wrote this entry 15 days after she left the Appalachian Trail to use the restroom and never returned. Her journal entries and the following text proved to investigators that Geraldine was alive for almost an entire month after the last time she was seen. Investigators released documents and photos relevant to the case after her body was found. The texts and calls from Geraldine's phone were as follows. She tried to text her husband on July 22nd. It read, "In some trouble. Got off trail to go to BR. Now lost. Can you call AMC to see if a trail maintainer can help me? Somewhere north of Woods Road. XOX." The text didn't go through, though, most likely due to her having been in a no-service area. It seems she continued walking westward and tried 12 more times to send the message. The last attempt was at 12:25 p.m. that same day. 2 hours later, she tried to send another message that didn't go through, but this one was completely blank. She tried another message the next day, writing, "Lost since yesterday. Off trail 3 or 4 miles. Call police for what to do, please. XOX." It also failed, and she tried one more time to no avail. So the next day, George Largay was concerned, and the official search began. Over the next few weeks, it expanded past the Warden Service to include search aircraft, state police, national park rangers, and fire departments. They pursued hikers' tips, scoured side trails, and set dogs to searching, all to no avail. Heavy rains that week obscured the trail, and Geraldine remained lost, a face on trail signpost for other hikers to look for. By this time, Geraldine had set up her tent nearly 2 miles from the trail. She had some food, water, and other camping supplies along with her journal. One of the Maine wardens who compiled the evidence wrote that Geraldine's writings were personal letters to her family. There were entries through August 10th, then nothing until the 18th. It was the last entry, 27 days after she got lost. There were also messages from the afternoon of July 30th. 2 texts were deleted on August 6th, which was the same date of her hopeless journal entry. The report wasn't clear as to whether or not she tried to actually make any calls during her almost month-long ordeal. Geraldine's husband reported to investigators that she only used her phone sparingly, depending on the circumstances of the situation. More than 2 years after she wrote that last entry, Geraldine Largay's body was found lying in her sleeping bag, which was inside of a zipped-up tent. A forester on contract named Kevin Adam, who was also a lieutenant in the U.S. Navy, found her campsite on October 11, 2015. He later described the first thoughts that came to his mind when he saw it. The possibilities were, it was a human body. It was animal bones. Or, if it is a human body, was it Jerry Largay? When he arrived at the site, his doubts evaporated. "I saw a flattened tent with a green backpack outside of it, and a human skull with what I believed to be a sleeping bag around it. I was 99% certain that this was Jerry Largay's." The campsite was difficult to see unless you're right next to it, he wrote, noting that the tent was under several large trees whose branches obstructed the sky. The site was in dense woods near the border of the Navy and public properties, and Geraldine had built a bedding area out of small trees, pine needles, and possibly some dirt in an attempt to keep her tent out of any water, Lieutenant Adam wrote. She had also tied a space blanket between branches to provide some cover. There was also evidence of lost opportunities. An open canopy nearby where she could have been seen from the sky had her tent been under it. Largay had also tried to set fires, Adams suggested, noting nearby trees that had been charred black, seemingly not from lightning, but by human hands. In the camp, they found the basics for hiking, such as maps, a rain jacket, a space blanket, string, Ziploc bags, and a flashlight that still worked. They also located a blue baseball cap, dental floss, a homemade necklace with white stone wrapped in string that were also found in the area. They found her notebook with moss growing on it. It was titled, "George, please read, XOXO." The medical examiner ruled that Geraldine Largay had died of exposure. Next up, we have Eric Robinson. 63-year-old Eric Robinson disappeared in July of 2011. The Australian native was hiking the 100-mile Highline Trail through the Uinta Mountains in Utah. He set out on July 28, 2011, on the hike, which was scheduled to take 10 days, and he was reported missing on August 7, 2011. The Duchesne County Sheriff's Office deployed a search and rescue team to find him the next day, but the search was unsuccessful. On August 19, 2016, a man from Colville and his 2 sons were camping near Ossip Lake in the Uinta Mountains and found the remains of a backpack and tent, police said. Eric was reported as an experienced outdoorsman who had recreated in the Himalayan mountains. Mr. Robinson had been dropped at the Chipeta Lake trailhead on July 28, 2011, and was scheduled to arrive at Mirror Lake on July 7, 2011 at 1200 hours. Summit County Sheriff's Office investigators arrived in the area and recovered human remains and several personal items. The remains were transported to the office of the medical examiner and were confirmed to be human. Further DNA testing is required to confirm the identity of the remains. Due to the proximity of the personal belongings, the human remains are believed to be those of Eric Robinson. And finally, Riley Zickel. 21-year-old hiker Riley Zickel of California was reported missing July 30, 2016, after he didn't return from Mount Jefferson Wilderness area in what was intended to be a simple overnight hike. He left from Brighton Bush Lake Road at the Pacific Crest Trailhead, where he planned to hike for one day and return the following day to visit friends in Seattle. He was last seen on the Pacific Crest Trail just north of Jefferson Park, where he visited with another hiker along the trail. Riley's family reported him missing, and Marion County deputies found his vehicle parked at the Jefferson Park trailhead. He was last seen on the Pacific Crest Trail just north of Jefferson Park, where he visited with another hiker along the trail. Riley's family reported him missing, and Marion County deputies found his vehicle parked at a Jefferson Park trailhead. He was an experienced hiker, had the appropriate equipment, and an adequate amount of food for his trip. Search and rescue teams from multiple agencies spent 7 days searching for Riley before efforts were suspended on August 6, 2016. Areas of snow complicated the search, and in spite of the snow, daytime temperatures occasionally reached 90 degrees. The elevation of the search area varied from 5,000 to 7,500 feet above sea level. More than 340 people spent about 5,000 hours and covered over 350 square miles in the Willamette National Forest around Mount Jefferson in efforts to find him. Salem-based helicopters from the Oregon Army National Guard and Cessna 182 aircraft from the Civil Air Patrol flew daily above the search area, but never found any sign of him. Officials from the Marion County Sheriff's Office were contacted by climbers who believed they located his body in a glacial area above Jefferson Park on Mount Jefferson, according to Sergeant Jeremy Landers of the Marion County Sheriff's Office. The recovery of the remains proved to be challenging, as the area where they were found is extremely steep with loose rocks and rock avalanches. The recovery was conducted by the Sheriff's Office Search and Rescue, Corvallis Mountain Rescue, the Civil Air Patrol, and the United States Forest Service. Riley Zickel was found within the 350 square miles that were initially searched, Landers said, but with portions of the initial search done by air and the area where he was located, it would have been difficult to spot him. Crews used the coordinates given by the group of hikers to fly overhead and preview the terrain. Members of Corvallis Mountain Rescue then recovered the body. Riley's father, Robin Zickel, traveled to Oregon from California and was at the trailhead when searchers brought his son out of the Jefferson Wilderness area, Sergeant Landers said. We are grateful to the many organizations that helped make today's recovery of Mr. Zickel possible, said Marion County Sheriff Joe Cast in a statement. Without their contributions, we would not have been able to bring closure to the Zickel family after these 3 long years. Hello, friends. In this video, we're going to discuss the strange disappearances of some of the people you'd most likely unexpect to go missing. Park rangers. Now, we're using parks as a broad term in the scope of this video, as it could include lands protected culturally or historically, including national parks, state parks, and other designated wildlife, wilderness, and recreational areas. Different countries use different names for this position. Warden is the favorite term in Canada, Ireland, and the United Kingdom. Within the United States, the National Park Service refers to the position as a park ranger. The U.S. Forest Service refers to the position as a forest ranger. Other countries use the term park warden or even game warden to describe this occupation. Now, the profession includes a number of disciplines and specializations, and park rangers are often required to be proficient in more than one of the following: law enforcement, emergency response, firefighting, dispatch, scientist and scholar, maintenance, and administration. These individuals, particularly those in administration, are often heavily cross-trained in several of the aforementioned areas in order to allow for knowledge of all other areas and duties under their authority. As a result, when people become lost or go missing in a park, the park rangers are usually the first ones on the scene to document the case and to start search and rescue efforts into motion. More than anyone, park rangers are very familiar with the missing person phenomenon, which happens in parks around the world, and were actually among the first to write about it. But what happens when one of these rangers themselves go missing? I invite you to join me now as we explore 5 strange cases of missing park rangers. With that said, let's begin. Number 1, Ranger Ralph W. Heath. Ralph W. Heath was a park ranger at Baxter State Park in Maine, United States, who allegedly died of exposure while attempting to rescue a woman who was lost on Mount Katahdin in 1963. On Monday, October 28th of that year, 2 women, Helen Mower and Margaret Ibisick, both from Concord, Massachusetts, took the Cathedral Trail and climbed Baxter Peak on the mountain. They reached the summit and stopped to have lunch at around 1:30 in the afternoon. When the 2 friends decided to start their hike again and head back down, they had a small argument over the route Margaret wanted to take. Helen simply wanted to go back the way they came, but Margaret wanted to bushwhack, which, very simply put, means to leave the established trail or get off the beaten path, as it were. Helen knew how risky this was, although Margaret had more hiking experience than she did, not by much, and only 3 years total. She thought it way too dangerous and stormed off to take Dudley Trail, which was the original trail they had taken to get there in the first place, and let her friend make her own mistakes and go her own way. It was a decision she would later regret very much. Margaret, on the other hand, thought she was taking a shortcut and laughed off her friend's warnings, and they went their separate ways, agreeing to meet at the Chimney Pond lean-to. When Helen reached the final destination and saw there was no sign of Margaret, she decided to wait, but got very worried very quickly. Though it was a nice and sunny day out that day, a nor'easter was blowing in, and the weather was about to very quickly take a turn for the worse. She started calling for Margaret at the headwell near and towards the mountain itself. She was pleasantly surprised when she heard her friend respond and started calling back, despite the fact she was asking for help. Margaret yelled that she was not hurt, but was stuck in the treacherous terrain and wouldn't possibly be able to continue her turn back, and pleaded with Helen to go and get some help. This is when Helen made her way to the ranger station and encountered Ranger Ralph Heath having dinner. She explained the situation, and Ralph immediately knew how dangerous that path was and how serious a problem they had. He was, however, thanking his lucky stars, in his mind at least, that there hadn't been any snowfall, at least not yet. As any other year, for as far back as he could remember, there would have been snow covering the mountain for weeks at that point in the year. Ralph followed Helen back to Chimney Point and yelled out in the direction of Margaret and instructed her in a very calm and clear voice to stay where she was and not try to move or go anywhere. Help was on the way. With the wind increasing like it was, Ralph knew that the situation could go from scary to deadly in a matter of just seconds. He had to act fast. He took Helen back to the ranger station and radioed his supervisor, Helan Taylor, and told him there was a hiker stranded in the upper basin on the mountain. Now, a little background on Mr. Ralph Heath to show what a brave man he was indeed, and how he was definitely not someone to shy away from trouble. He served in World War II and was honorably discharged. However, a house fire destroyed everything he owned but the clothes on his back, including his discharge papers. He was redrafted to serve in the Korean War before anyone could verify he had already been discharged and had finished his service to the country. Ralph, however, went without hesitation to serve, only for his wife to decide she didn't want to deal with another tour, especially one he shouldn't have had to have gone on, and file for divorce. So, this was a man who was seeking solitude and peace in his life after all of this tragedy and heartbreak, and he absolutely loved his job as a ranger and the beauty of the mountains. Despite the weather outside becoming more and more perilous and the orders from the supervising ranger that they had to wait until morning to attempt any kind of search and rescue, Ralph decided the risk to Margaret was too great, leaving her out there all alone at night. Snow was definitely coming, and a lot of it. He decided to attempt to rescue himself, despite it being nightfall and dark outside. The temperature had drastically dropped as well. He borrowed Helen's backpack and filled it with essentials such as food, a sleeping bag, water, a parka, and extra clothes. He also took 80 feet of rope, and at 11 p.m. that same night, headed alone down Dudley Trail. It wasn't until 5 hours later, at 4 in the morning, that he reported back to Helen. He told her he had spoken to Margaret about an hour after heading out and was able to obtain her location, when he again told her to stay put and assured her help was on the way. She reiterated she was uninjured, but very cold. She's probably more than a little scared as well, I'm sure. He told Helen that Margaret was near the waterfall, and he wouldn't be able to reach her without more rope and more people. This was an area that even ice climbers considered treacherous and dangerous. Ralph was also extremely concerned because Margaret was refusing to stay and wait for help to arrive, and was determined to find a way out herself for fear she would freeze to death before anyone would be able to rescue her. After reassuring Helen and telling her what was going on, he contacted his supervisor, Helan Taylor, and made him aware as well. Taylor dispatched the Maine Forest Service, 2 additional park rangers, and a Maine game warden. By 6 in the morning, Tuesday the 29th, an icy rain began to fall and the wind had picked up drastically. Ralph Heath ate his breakfast and then informed Helen Maurer of his plans. He was going to ascend the ravine from Chimney Pond, climb straight up the head wall and into the waterfall, where he would provide comfort to Barbara, and if he couldn't manage to rescue her himself, at least she wouldn't be scared and alone, and he would wait with her until the additional resources arrived to get them both out. Now, he was clearly putting himself at great risk, knowing it was unlikely he would be able to do anything but just sit with Margaret and wait. Yet, he did it anyway. He was truly a hero. While the plan was very reasonable, and despite being a chain smoker, Ralph was in great shape and a capable hiker and climber. However, he had hiked Dudley Trail 4 times in the last 24 hours, and it was a very strenuous and hard trail to get through. He was absolutely exhausted at this point, and shouldn't have been doing any more hiking or climbing without getting some much-needed rest. This would, after all, be a trailless climb he was planning to make. He wasn't going to leave Margaret, however, so the admonishments and warnings from his co-workers and even Helen fell on deaf ears. Ralph reached Barbara just as Hurricane Jenny reached the mountain. He sat with her for a little while and the two hunkered down. A ranger sergeant set out on foot towards Chimney Pond as well and stated that, by the time he got to just the basin, the conditions were whiteout with gale-force winds. By noon, not even the jeeps could make it to the trailhead. There was 18 inches of snow already and more falling fast. He even reported that, only halfway up the mountain, his clothes had frozen solid and literally cracked at the elbows. Having no visibility and facing merciless winds, not to mention the condition of his clothing, forced him back down the mountain. He stated he knew that both Ralph and Margaret were in some very serious trouble as help could no longer get to them. It would be impossible for them to help themselves as well. The following morning, Wednesday, October 30th, 1963, Warden Supervisor David Priest returned to Roaring Brook and set up what we today call an incident command center and had at least 35 people there working at all times. All different avenues of help were brought in and explored, but nobody could do anything as the snow was still accumulating and fast on Friday morning. Flash forward to November 1st. Now it had been 5 full days since Margaret had gotten herself stuck and 4 whole days since Ralph Heath had joined her to provide comfort and possible rescue, which we know now he was unable to do. On Saturday, November 2nd, all teams and persons involved decided that any rescue attempts were futile and that they were simply wasting resources at that point. Mr. William Lowell Putnam III was one of the most experienced mountaineers in the country at the time and had been helping with the rescue effort since Friday. Finally, on Sunday, November 3rd, he made the statement that he believed Ralph and Margaret had most likely died on Tuesday and reiterated the waste of resources should they continue on this impossible trek to try and save them. It wasn't until almost 6 months later, in April of 1964, that Margaret Ivesick's body was found and finally able to be brought down the mountain and sent home. Even at this time, though, they needed chemical salts to melt the ice so as not to damage the corpse in any way, and the rescue still took an additional 3 days. It was found during the autopsy that Margaret was severely injured and hadn't survived more than a few hours due to the extreme blood loss. Her official cause of death was exsanguination. In other words, she bled out. 2 weeks later, on May 15th, they finally found Ralph's body. He was found, oddly enough, 400 feet above where Margaret was found. They airlifted him out of there, and his autopsy showed nothing at all. The coroner stated, "It looks as if he simply sat down and went to sleep," which is not uncommon when people freeze to death. Now, folks, though this was a bit of a long one, I think it's important we go over a few of the facts here. First, if Margaret had died very quickly after getting stuck where she was, how was she yelling to Ralph hours later? She had severed an artery in her leg and would have bled out within just minutes. Still, she was calling out and answering him hours after she initially got stuck. How is this even possible? She'd called out to Helen as well, even before that, and we know neither one was under any kind of duress or sick at all, so they couldn't have been hallucinating. There were no other bodies found in the area that time, and no one else had come forward claiming to have been the person stuck up there and answering or calling for help that could have been mistaken for Margaret. This is very strange, but becoming more and more common. Either search and rescue workers will hear the calls of people who are missing only to never be able to find the location of where the calls are coming from, or the person who is stuck or lost will hear search and rescue but never seem to be able to find them either. The weather coming on so suddenly and so strong all at once is another very familiar factor when talking about the missing in the woods and the mountains. In fact, they were weeks late for any snow at all, and the weather started out that day as sunny and warm. This is just one of the many parameters we now look at while investigating the strange deaths and disappearances in the national parks. How and why did it all come on so suddenly, almost remarkably so? I guess we'll never know. But that doesn't stop us from investigating and pondering and searching for answers in the truth, though, does it? Number 2, Ranger Randy Morganson. In July of 1996, Ranger Randy Morganson was working as a backcountry ranger at Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks. He was the most ranger in the High Sierras, having been a backwoods ranger for 28 years at that time. On this particular day, July 21st, 1996, Randy loaded his pack and went on his routine and regular patrol of his station. He was 64 years old and in almost perfect health. Some of his co-workers even thought he was invincible and impervious to the perils that came with the job. It was just about daybreak when he headed out to patrol near Bench Lake, taking nothing with him but an old ski pole to use as a hiking stick. He was never seen or heard from again. Now, as is often the case in these strange disappearances, a sudden rain started to fall, blew up out of nowhere, got rid of any footprints or other evidence as to where Ranger Randy could have possibly gone or what could have happened to him. Over the following days, there was plenty of frustration as dogs followed scents that seemed to abruptly stop, and random pieces of gear were found in several different locations, but none could be positively linked to Randy. A FLIR helicopter equipped with an infrared camera picked up a campfire burning on a hillside, but with no one in sight tending it. Eventually, the search was called off, with no sign of Randy or a body. Then, a letter arrived at Randy and Judy Morgansen's home in Sedona, Arizona, from Randy. Judy opened the letter and noted it had been postmarked 2 days after his apparent disappearance. Since there is no postal service in the national park, Judy didn't understand just how Randy could have mailed the letter. That added to the suspicions that he had simply left the area to start a new life away from the National Park Service. 13 days after Randy had been reported missing, in early August 1996, the official search, which included helicopters, dog teams, and dozens upon dozens of volunteers, was called off. Not a single trace of Randy had been found, not even a footprint. Finally, in July 2001, 5 years after the search was called off for Randy, a 19-year-old member of a California Conservation Corps trail building crew ventured off-trail and found some remains. The worker found some new evidence near a creek and a gorge in the Widow Peak drainage, very near the outermost borders of the search area, below the pools of a waterfall. Rangers were called in to search and soon discovered a tattered shirt with Morgansen's badge attached. Then a backpack with a buckle fastened, and a boot. On close examination of the single boot, which was half submerged in water, it had something white protruding from it. A leg bone. The boot and pack seemed to match the description of gear that Randy reportedly had been using that day. Teams for both investigation and recovery were flown in, and shortly after, a functioning park-issue radio was discovered resting on top of the falls, not at the bottom like the other evidence. It was turned to the on position. This discovery confused matters even more. Although these remains seemed to confirm Randy had been in the mountains the whole time, investigators weren't certain whether this is where Randy had died. Rangers had remembered already searching this gorge and crossing at the exact spot where the radio was found. Retired Sierra Sub-District Ranger Alden Nash believes Morgansen had fallen through a snow bridge and broken his leg, and his body had simply been hidden beneath ice throughout the search. Weirdly, during the rescue attempt in 1996, Randy's wife Judy had dreamed of a dead man floating in a lake. I don't think it was an accident, says Eric Blem, author of The Last Season, a book about the disappearance of Randy Morgansen, which is well worth a read, by the way. Blem says Randy may have wanted to appear to have died on the job just to make sure Judy, who was still his wife at the time, got the benefit from the government, a policy not honored in the case of taking one's own life. If he wanted to throw off the dogs or sucker people into believing something happened, he did a great job, Blem says. After so many years, with the bones gnawed, there's no way to say exactly what happened. The National Park Service named a peak in memory of Randy. The unofficial Mount Morgansen, so named in his memory, is the first peak west of Mount Russell, a half a mile away, and just north of Mount Whitney. Mount Morgansen should be distinguished from the west peak of Mount Russell, the higher of the Russell's twin summits, which are only separated by a tenth of a mile. A summit registered with the name Mount Randy Morgansen, 13,920 feet, was taken to the top by two park veterans in 2007. A peak bagger named Richard Kaparsski found the original register missing when he climbed Mount Morgansen on June 20, 2008. He placed a temporary one that day and made a huge effort to return to the summit 1 week later with a weatherproof ammo can and a replacement journal. Barely a handful of people, if any, signed it each year. Number 3, Ranger Brendan Unit. Larimer County, Colorado Department of Natural Resources Ranger Brendan Unit, 27 years old, went missing while out searching at night for a missing boater. While there had been nothing reported about the results of the initial missing person who Brendan was looking for, it seems a sudden high wind event caused him to capsize in his boat and die of what was officially said to be freshwater drowning. Now, folks, I'm no expert, but what I do know about is the strange weather events and causes of death that just don't fit the season or the profession the person in question was in. And I'm not the only one either. Many people are wondering how professional outdoorsmen could capsize and drown. And what about this so-called strange high wind event? Why does there always seem to be a sudden change in the weather during one of these missing persons encounters? These are the things many of us in this community wonder about after seeing case after case after case. The same thing over and over again, but never with any definitive or even sensible answers. Number 4, Ranger Jeff Christensen. In July of 2005, another seasonal park ranger died under mysterious circumstances in the same county Brendan unit passed away in as well. Jeff Christensen was conducting a routine backcountry patrol of the Lake Lawn trailhead when he allegedly lost his footing and fell from Mummy's Range in Rocky Mountain National Park in Larimer County, Colorado. The search for the initially missing ranger lasted a little over a week, and he was found on August 6, 2005 by a hiker. The official cause of death was a left temporal skull fracture that led to a subdural hematoma. The ranger has been said to have lost his footing and died of a tragic accidental fall. He'd only been on the job for 4 years and was survived by his parents. Now, is it possible for someone with at least 4 years' experience to die of something so simple? Could it be that there's something out there in our national parks and forests hunting these rangers? Perhaps they or it wants to take out the people who are going to be able to help and possibly even save the other people this mysterious predator or predators are trying to take out. We must keep searching for the truth. We owe it to all the people who die of something that is seemingly simple and accidental, but could very well be something much more sinister. Number 5, Ranger Paul Fugate. Here is yet another tragic account of a park ranger who vanished mysteriously while doing his job, never to be seen or heard from again. Now, Paul was known as a rebel and even anti-establishment to a point. He stayed for weeks at a time in a small cobblestone cabin on site at the monument. He was a naturalist who did small tasks such as answering the visitors' questions and putting together trail guides. Originally, Paul worked at the Navajo Monument in Arizona, but was transferred soon after being disciplined by one of his bosses about his laziness and slovenly appearance. Apparently, this supervisor admitted in a later report that he was annoyed he couldn't technically fire Paul and also that he hated the hippies coming in to work for the monument. Paul was charged with stealing government equipment when he took some hay home for his wife's horse. He was in an open relationship with his wife and sleeping with multiple women who were co-workers. While all of this may seem irrelevant, we must look at every aspect we can of a person's life when they go missing under such strange circumstances, especially when people in their profession are seemingly doing so at an alarming rate, and have been for a while. Before he left his post that fateful day, he left instructions with the only other staff member there that if he wasn't back by a certain time, for them to close up without him. He then walked out and down towards the area of land the park was about to acquire, one which was shrouded in problems as there had been much conflict about the 400-acre purchase with the local Apache tribe. Again, he was never seen or heard from, and no body has ever been found. Well, there you have it. What do you make of these strange disappearances of rangers who work and in some cases literally live in these parks? If they can go missing and leave no trace, what does that hold for the rest of us? Frightening, isn't it? Hello, friends. In this episode, we're doing something just a little bit different. While our main focus will always be missing persons cases, this video will delve into the mysteries side of the channel name. Now, while researching and writing this episode, I was a little bit hesitant at first to recount some of the bizarre stories being found. However, after giving it some careful consideration in the broader scope of things, I realized that in a world where people can literally turn a corner on a mountain trail and seemingly disappear from the face of the earth while leaving absolutely no trace in the process, and we have covered disappearances from Mount Shasta in previous videos, well, then maybe some of these stories and legends aren't as far-fetched as first perceived. With that said, let's begin, shall we? Mount Shasta. Very few places in the United States are as completely steeped in mystery and the supernatural as Mount Shasta. located in Northern California, only about an hour from the Oregon border. This semi-dormant volcano and the surrounding area are, according to legend, home to spirits, gods, Bigfoot, aliens, fairies, robots, ascended masters, Lemurians, occultists, underground bases, secret tunnels, and other strange entities and features. Rising to a height of 14,162 feet, Mount Shasta is an imposing figure set against a backdrop of stunning wilderness. Rugged outcrops, scenic vistas, mountain streams, waterfalls, lakes, glaciers, and caverns of various size. It truly is one of the most impressive mountains in the United States. And even though the last volcanic activity was way back in 1786, it's still currently considered active by the USGS. But aside from the beauty and natural grandeur, Mount Shasta has an ominous aura about it. The mountain does hold some dark secrets. Many consider it a place of portals to strange realms of the unexplained. The indigenous people of the area revered Mount Shasta as a magical and supernatural place many, many decades before the white man arrived in Northern California. One popular Shasta legend claims that before there were humans on the planet, the chief of the great sky spirits grew tired of his icy home in the above world. He used a stone to make a hole in the sky and shoved ice and snow into the hole. The resulting mound was what came to be known as Mount Shasta. Next, the chief of the sky climbed down onto Mount Shasta, and seeing it was barren, he chose to place trees there. And when he walked through the snow, it melted and formed streams and rivers. As the leaves began to fall from the trees, the sky chief used his breath to turn them into birds. The chief of the great sky spirits was so pleased with Mount Shasta that he chose to make it home for his family. Not missing the cold from the above world, the sky chief made a hole in the middle of the mountain and placed a fire inside it to keep his family warm. When he placed logs into the fire, the mountain would shake and emit sparks and spew fire. Although it's unknown as to exactly how Mount Shasta was named, one popular explanation states that the name comes from the Russian language. Supposedly, settlers from Russia who lived in coastal California were able to see the summit of Mount Shasta off in the distance. They referred to it as Shastal, which means white or pure in their language. This eventually came to be pronounced and shortened to just Mount Shasta. Others claim that one of the local tribes of the indigenous peoples in the area, known as the Shastika, loved and hunted on the mountain, and it came to be named after them. Regardless of how it got to be named, nowadays Mount Shasta is a well-known and popular destination for snow skiers, hikers, hunters, anglers, spelunkers, and many others who love rugged outdoor activities. Mount Shasta is also a popular destination for New Agers and other seekers wishing to bask in the vibe of the mountain. Currently, Shasta is home to a huge amount of day spas, retreats, a Buddhist monastery, as well as a plethora of New Age consultants, Zen instructors, and those claiming to be ambassadors to space aliens and ascended masters. In fact, there is so much strangeness on the mountain, one is almost assured to have some sort of weird experience when visiting Shasta. Paranormal investigators state that the most unusual encounters usually happen when you least expect it and are far away from other people. Shaman, New Age seekers, and those trying to contact the mothership may inadvertently disturb the energies on the mountain and cause truly paranormal events to become hidden away, according to some. Nevertheless, there's been more than enough bizarre happenings in the area to suggest that there are strange powers at work here. In the lore of the Native Americans familiar with Shasta, the terms for ghost, soul, and life are very similar. According to these tribes, ghosts, which are often spotted near burial areas as flickering orbs of light, are to be feared, as merely observing them is said to be an omen foretelling bad luck or perhaps even death. Also, according to their legends, after death, the soul is said to travel west, rise into the sky, and then head into the Milky Way to the world of the afterlife. The Shasta Indians believe that singing funeral songs help the deceased spirit on its way. Also, according to Shasta traditional lore, the entire region is haunted with Oxkey, which literally translates to pains. But according to the natives, these are spiritual entities capable of taking on the form of tiny people and animals who live among the area's many boulders, lakes, summits, and also in the rapids and other tributaries of flowing water. The indigenous Shasta peoples consider the Oxkey to be the cause of all illness, bad luck, and death, and also have the ability to jump into the bodies of unsuspecting victims. According to legend, only a true shaman can exorcise away these demonic entities. In more recent and typical ghost lore, parts of Interstate 5 that run nearby the mountain are reportedly haunted by various unidentified ghosts, possibly the victims of car accidents. Or they may be tulpas or thought forms, brought about by the indigenous people of the area. Some tribes believe that talking about or merely even thinking of certain dark entities can draw them out and cause them to take form. The ruins of Old Shasta Town from the 1800s lie just south of Mount Shasta and west of Redding, California, which at one time was the county seat. The Old Town area is home to several reported ghosts, especially in the old courthouse, which claimed that at night the sounds of criminal trials can still be heard, and in the Gallows Park at the back of the courthouse, where those found guilty were hung and still linger to this day. A Pioneer Babies burial spot on nearby old Highway 99, which at one time was a stagecoach road through the area, is claimed to be haunted by a particularly evil and malevolent entity. Some of the stranger stories from the area are based on the Native American legends of Shasta being home to several mysterious races of beings, which include the aforementioned little people, but also tribes of reptilians and large malevolent humanoids known as the Shupchets, who legend says live in the area of Flume Creek and secretly traverse the lava tunnels to the summit of Mount Shasta. The early white settlers in the area also told of the tunnel-traveling giants, referring to them as the Lemurians. The concept of Lemuria originally began as a rumored lost continent in the Indian Ocean from a somewhat scientific theory which explained how lemurs were able to migrate to India from Madagascar. Some folks, however, occultists and New Agers in particular, considered Lemuria as a lost continent which was home to an advanced race, the Lemurians, who were the supposed ancestors of the legendary Atlanteans of the other well-known lost continent of Atlantis. Legends state that the Lemurians are giant, human-appearing beings who bore some form of appendage on their massive forehead, which provided them with psychic powers. The story of the Lemurians on Mount Shasta mainly comes from a bizarre book called A Dweller on Two Planets, or The Dividing of the Way, which was written in the 1880s by cultist Frederick Spencer Oliver. Among other things, Oliver claimed that a secret city glittering with jewels was located inside of Mount Shasta, and he further established a connection between it and Lemuria. His writings were popular at the time, and his fantastical ideas of Mount Shasta and Lemuria were referenced and retold in many news articles and other books of that era. Along these lines of legend, there are also stories of a secret society which lives in the secret city deep inside Mount Shasta. The secret society is known as the Great White Brotherhood. Now, that's not because of the color of their skin, but rather the brilliant white light that often surrounds these beings, who also wear spotless white robes. They are said to be a fraternity of spiritually advanced beings, or ascended masters, who are drawn to Mount Shasta due to the energy found on its peak. The Brotherhood allegedly live inside of the mountain and travel through tunnels of gold to their hidden temples made of jewels and crystals. Guy W. Ballard, an occultist from Chicago, ventured to Mount Shasta in 1930 to inquire about reports from another occultist, William Paley, regarding a group of holy men called the Brotherhood of Mount Shasta, whom Paley claimed to have observed while traveling on the mountain. Ballard, along with his wife Edna, was extremely curious and ventured to Mount Shasta in hopes of contacting the ascended masters of which Paley wrote. Once, when Ballard was out on a day hike alone, he paused to rest at a clear mountain spring in the McCloud River Valley area. He claims that while resting by the stream, he was approached by a strange young man who appeared out of nowhere and offered him a drink of some creamy, milky liquid. The young stranger told Ballard that the liquid came from what he called the universal supply. Ballard states that when he drank the liquid, it had an immediate electric and clarifying effect on him, making him feel oddly energized and refreshed. The young stranger then revealed his true name, the Ascended Master Saint Germain, and was suddenly clad in a white, jeweled robe, making him appear godlike. As Ballard looked on in stunned amazement, he noticed that a mountain lion had approached him to within a few feet. Somehow able to fight off his fear of the animal, Ballard claimed that the mountain lion suddenly became as docile and playful as a kitten. At this point, Saint Germain proudly informed Ballard that he had passed the test of courage and gave him 4 small brownish cakes. Ballard ate the cakes and claimed that they further increased the clarity of the liquid he had consumed and aided him in being receptive to the master's teachings. Saint Germain stated that he had searched several continents for someone worthy to learn his instructions regarding the great laws of life, and now Ballard, his wife Edna, and their son Donald were chosen to be his accredited messengers. After a series of meetings with the Ascended Master, Ballard claims he was able to channel Saint Germain's wisdom and plans for implementing the 7th Golden Age, the I Am, which Germain stated would bring about a new age of earthly perfection. Ballard further claimed that through channeling Saint Germain, he was also able to view his own past lives and claimed that he had been George Washington in a previous life. When Ballard returned to Chicago in 1931, he set about putting Saint Germain's plans for the New Age of Enlightenment in motion. By 1932, Ballard and his wife Edna had founded the I Am religious sect, the Saint Germain Press, and the Saint Germain Foundation. Ballard, using the pseudonym Godfrey Ray King, began turning out books, pamphlets, and articles about his new religion. By 1936, Ballard had amassed a large literary collection of several books, compilation of songs and affirmations, as well as a periodical magazine. Ballard had no problem drawing crowds who came to listen to he and Edna channel Saint Germain's teaching, and soon schools and reading rooms began to spring up, and by 1938, the sect had almost 3 million devotees. Skeptics claimed that the new religion was nothing but old, recycled cult practices, and when Guy died in 1939, although his wife Edna claimed that he had not passed on but rather ascended, many of the devoted became disillusioned with Ballard's rather ordinary departure from this plane and stopped attending the meetings. After recovering from alleged mail fraud charges, the I Am movement, although now considerably smaller, survives until this day. The I Am Reading Room in the town of Mount Shasta offers Ballard's channeled writings, Ascended Master and I Am art, and I Am musical recordings that are purported to alter consciousness and allow for further spiritual enlightenment. The music has been described as having an ethereal, warbling quality that many believe enhances, among other things, psychic abilities and astral travel. The experiences Ballard wrote about in 1930 inspired many other stories of encounters with strange beings on Mount Shasta. In 1932, Edward Lasner claimed he knew of white-robed people who hoarded a cache of gold and lived at the 11,000-foot level. And in 1934, a man named Abraham Mansfield claimed he met a whole tribe of Lemurians on the mountain, who revealed to him an extensive network of secret tunnels. 2 decades later, spiritualist Erlene Cheney stated that she received an initiation in a secret temple hidden upon Mount Shasta. Before becoming a spiritual guru, Cheney was a Hollywood starlet, possibly explaining her passion and penchant for the elaborate costumes and theatrics which she used in her New Age church and mystery school, Astara, founded in 1951. Writing in her book, Secrets from Mount Shasta, Cheney tells how she and her husband were given instructions to go to Mount Shasta during a channeling session in 1952. While camping at Panther Meadow, located on the south side at about 7,385 feet, Cheney and her husband suddenly felt led to climb farther up the mountain. During their ascent, they were met by a strange young man who seemed to know all about their quest and proceeded to give them his teachings. Eventually, the pair were escorted into a secret place known as the Cave of the Mystic Circle. It was here that they were also introduced to other adepts, including the Ascended Master Kudhumi, who also assisted them with their teachings. The pair's lessons climaxed in an initiation in which Cheney claimed she was shown the inner Great Temple at the peak of Mount Shasta, which featured what she described as a great astral cathedral lit from above by a glorious star. She further stated that these sights can only be seen by the truly initiated and remain invisible to the eyes of lesser adepts and mere mortals. Cheney has also previously claimed to have been initiated in a secret ceremony inside the Great Pyramid of Egypt, which does make her one of a very few select souls on this plane of existence indeed. Current New Agers and occultists claim that Saint Germain and other ascended masters and adepts continue to wander the mountain appearing to seekers, particularly in the area around Panther Meadow. These same occultists will readily explain how the earth is actually hollow and contains numerous secret underground cities, among them Telos, where descendants of ancient Lemuria currently live and are presided over by the Ascended Master High Priest Adama. Mount Shasta is also known for its weird glowing mystery lights. These mysterious floating orbs of light have been reported on the mountain since the arrival of the white settlers and among the Native Americans years prior to that. The best time to observe the lights is usually at dusk, around midnight, and just before dawn. While indigenous tribes of the area thought the lights to be ghosts, New Agers and occultists prefer to think that the lights are from the secret ceremonies of the Lemurians or the Great White Brotherhood. The lights have become so well known that they alone have brought the curious to Mount Shasta. Based on newspaper articles from around the turn of the last century, the lights were observed by passengers on trains that passed by the mountain in the night. The mysterious lights continue to be reported today, and many people have come to associate them with UFO activity that occurs frequently on the mountain. If you would like to perhaps catch a glimpse of these lights without traveling to Mount Shasta, there are live webcams available online which offer 24-hour-day streams of the mountain's peak. There are literally thousands of lava tube caves known to exist on and nearby Mount Shasta. The strangest one is Pluto Cave, which was thought to have been created by a basaltic lava flow almost 200,000 years ago. The tunnel-like cave was sacred to the indigenous tribes of Shasta and was rediscovered by white settlers during the mid-1800s. As it's very foreboding and eerie, it takes its name from the Roman god of the underworld, Pluto. In addition to being called Pluto Cave, it's also known to the locals as Pluto's Cave and Pluto Caves. The cave has garnered quite a reputation in supernatural and occult circles as a place to find extraterrestrials or various entities from the spirit realm that live deep inside the mountain. Recent explorers have reported coming across evidence of sacrificial fires and objects from rituals left behind in the cave by those who've held secret ceremonies and vigils for paranormal or occult purposes. Stories abound of people going insane after spending the night in the cave tube, where they were allegedly confronted by unspeakable horrors. While these tales may be the stuff of wild campfire stories or urban legends, those who have visited the cave do find it frightening and eerie nonetheless. Another strange area located near Mount Shasta is Burney Falls, an amazing natural wonder that pours 129 feet down into Burney Creek in the MacArthur Burney Falls State Memorial Park. President Theodore Roosevelt once remarked that this amazing waterfall should be considered the eighth wonder of the world. There are persistent stories of fairies or fae folk who appear in the mist, or just in the edge of the vision of those who gaze out over the falls. Perhaps these fairies are actually the little people described in Native American legends from around Mount Shasta. It's also stated that these little people will only appear to those who are honestly seeking them for spiritual enlightenment and not just for a paranormal thrill. Burney Falls is located approximately 6 miles north of the junction of Highways 299 and 89 on Highway 229. Fairy sightings have also been reported near the area around McCloud Falls, which is made up of 3 amazing falls flowing into the McCloud River. While the lower and upper falls can easily be accessed by vehicles, the middle falls, reportedly the most haunted, is accessible only on foot. Not surprisingly, the middle of the 3 falls is also claimed to be the best spot for fairy sightings. McCloud Falls is located on Highway 89, approximately 6 miles east of the town of McCloud. Mount Shasta is also considered to be one of the most active hotspots of North America's UFO activity. Those well-versed in extraterrestrials state that Mount Shasta is a prime spot for visiting aliens, and weird lights are often reported hovering near the area at night and have also been spotted disappearing into the mountain. Castle Crags State Park, just south of the town of Dunsmuir, California, along Interstate 5, is also considered to be another active UFO hotspot. The trails in the park lead into strange landscapes of weird, jagged rock formations, and it's the perfect location for encountering anomalous phenomena. While Northern California is full of Bigfoot sightings and encounters, Bigfoot legends seem to be a more modern tale around Mount Shasta. Gigantic humanoid footprints discovered in 1955 at the 11,000-foot level have been said to be those of Bigfoot by some, or of giant Lemurians by others. One of the oddest reports ever to come out of Mount Shasta was in 1962, when a woman claimed to have watched a female Bigfoot give birth high up on the mountain. To this day, New Age seekers, campers, hikers, and even loggers have had sightings of these tall, hairy cryptids on Mount Shasta. Hello, friends, and welcome to Strange Stories of the Alaskan Triangle. I think you would all agree with me that there are certain areas of the planet that seem to be magnets for missing persons and mysterious disappearances. Vast, untouched wildernesses of sprawling forest, icy mountain peaks, and desolate tundra in Alaska, known as the Alaskan Triangle, has been at the center of over 16,000 disappearances since 1988. What is going on in this remote, unexplored wilderness that causes so many people to disappear without a trace? Is there a scientific explanation for why so many people go missing? Or is something more sinister happening? Now, a little bit about Alaska. Alaska is a vast desert almost of isolation and beauty, known for its towering mountains, rich oil fields, and extreme fishing in the Bering Sea. Among the vast untouched wilderness of sprawling forest, icy mountain peaks, and desolate tundra are the unexplained stories of over 16,000 disappearances. In any given year, anywhere from 500 to 2,000 people go missing in Alaska, never to be seen again. Authorities conduct hundreds of rescue missions, but most often return without finding the missing person or any evidence at all. Accidental injuries are the third highest cause of death in Alaska, twice the national incidence rate. That statistic comes from the Alaska Division of Public Health. In addition to car accidents, this category of fatalities can also include people falling down mountains or slipping into the spaces between glaciers, also known as crevices. Of those accidental deaths, drowning is the third highest cause. Many times, the cold temperatures cause bodies to sink to the bottom of the water, rather than float to the top, adding yet another challenge to finding missing people. Now, what exactly is the Alaskan Triangle? The Alaskan Triangle, first named in 1972, connects the state's largest city of Anchorage in the south to Juneau in the southeast panhandle to Barrow, a small town on the state's north coast. Roughly 1 in every 250 people that have vanished in Alaska did so in the Alaskan Triangle, and since 1988, there have been over 16,000 disappearances in this so-called triangle. Statistically, Alaska has more annual missing persons reports than anywhere else in the country, twice the national average. It also has the highest number of missing people who are never found. In 2007, for example, 2,833 people were reported missing, and when compared to the state's comparatively low population of around 670,000 at the time, that equates to about 4 in every 1,000 people, a staggering amount. Along with missing persons reports, state troopers oversee search and rescue operations. In 2007, they performed 42 missions related to overdue hikers, 85 related to overdue boaters, and 100 related to overdue snow machine operators who were temporarily missing. Those facts come from the Alaska Governor's Office. The Civil Air Service also assists with search and rescue missions, and Alaska's branch received the most state funding and saved the most lives in 2006 out of all other state branches. Now, let's delve into some of the more infamous disappearances from the Alaskan Triangle. First, the disappearance of House Majority Leader Hale Boggs and Representative Nick Begich. In 1972, two prominent politicians, House Majority Leader Hale Boggs and Representative Nick Begich, along with aide Russell Brown and Bush pilot Don Jones, mysteriously vanished in the region while on their way back from Anchorage to Juneau while flying in their Cessna 310 aircraft. An intense search lasted for 39 days, including 400 aircraft, an SR-71 Blackbird, dozens of boats, including 12 from the Coast Guard. The search area covered over 32,000 square miles, an area about the size of the state of South Carolina. No evidence of the plane was ever found, and the men were eventually declared dead. At the time, there were theories claiming the disappearance was orchestrated or covered up by then FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover in response to intense political struggles he had with Boggs. To this day, no trace of the plane or the men has ever been found. Next, 1986 UFO incident. In 1986, a Japanese plane was flying from Iceland to Anchorage when it came across 3 UFOs. The 3 unidentified flying objects followed the airliner for approximately 400 miles through the Alaska Triangle. The 3 unidentified flying objects followed the airliner for approximately 400 miles through the Alaskan Triangle. One of the objects was said to be twice the size of an aircraft carrier. The crew reported seeing flashing lights following their plane, and air traffic controllers also witnessed something unidentifiable on their radar that was reported as close as 5 miles to the plane. The pilot claimed that at one point, the 2 smaller ships appeared directly in front of the plane at pretty close range. He described the 2 smaller ships and the mothership disappearing and reappearing quickly, moving fast and stopping suddenly, which, of course, is impossible for a normal airliner to do. In order to escape the UFOs, the pilot received special permission from the ground crew to fly at a lower altitude while making several elusive turns to evade the objects, but nothing he did could evade them. After about 32 minutes, the UFOs disappeared, although the pilot claimed he thought the entire encounter lasted much longer than that. It's not uncommon in UFO encounters for a time to seem to stop, speed up, or stand still. Next, missing Douglas C-54 Skymaster, serial number 42-72469. In the 1950s, there was a military plane carrying an 8-man crew and 36 passengers. The plane lost contact with the ground and was never heard from again. There were 2 separate reports of UFO activity in the area at the time of the disappearance. One was a week before, and the other was 2 days after. The Army ended up conducting the largest military search and rescue mission at that time and found nothing. To this day, it's known as one of the largest groups of military personnel to ever go missing. Now let's talk a little bit about missing hikers and mountain climbers. First up, Richard Lyman Griffiths. Richard Lyman Griffiths from Spokane, Washington, invented a wilderness survival cocoon, and in the summer of 2006, he headed into the wilderness of southeast Alaska to test his invention. Oddly, no one reported him missing for a year. When authorities began searching for him, they learned a bus dropped off Griffiths along the Alaska Highway. He stopped at a lodge near the White River, where he left some of his gear and told people he planned to hike upriver to McCarthy, a small town in the Wrangell-St. Elias National Park. He was never seen again. Since Griffiths told friends he might spend the winter in Alaska, no one worried about him for several months. But finally, a friend called the Canadian Mounties and reported him missing. His friend had no idea where Griffiths was planning to go to test his wilderness cocoon. No trace of him or his bright orange cocoon has ever been found. Now, mountain climbing, as we all know, is a dangerous pursuit. In addition to Mount Denali, the highest peak in North America, Alaska boasts many of the most challenging mountains and glaciers any daring alpinist could hope to conquer. Mountain climbers die every year in Alaska, but most climbers ascend in groups. If one or two members of the group tragically fall into a crevice, their companions can tell the story about what happened to them. When a solo climber makes a fatal mistake, no one is there to record the details, and experts can only guess at what happened. One such climber, Naomi Uemura, a famous Japanese adventurer and mountain climber, decided to attempt a solo winter ascent of Denali in 1984. Uemura had already successfully summited Denali on his own when he wanted to try a more challenging climb in the winter. He made it to the top on February 13, 1984, but something happened on his descent and he never returned to base camp. Conditions near the top of Denali when Uemura disappeared included high winds and a temperature of 50 below. Such brutal conditions leave little room for human error. More recently, on March 7, 2018, Ryan Johnson and Marc-Andre Leclerc, two experienced climbers, failed to return from a climb on a 7-peaked mountain near Juneau. In this instance, though, searchers found a clue hinting at the fate of the two men. They found an intact anchor rope at the top of an ice chute on one peak, and then saw two climbing ropes in a crevice midway down the same peak. A spokesman for the Alaska State Troopers said the evidence showed the climbers made it to the top and set an anchor. Then, she said, they were either taken out by an avalanche, a rope failed, or something else catastrophic happened. Paul Michael Lemaitre. 65-year-old Michael Lemaitre was competing for the first time in the 85th running of the Mountain Marathon race, with participants running up the mountain surrounded by thick forests and creeks over 3.1 to 3.5 miles. Starting in downtown Seward, racers run a half mile to the bottom of Mount Marathon, then scramble about 2,900 vertical feet straight up cliffs and mud and shale before getting to Race Point, an artificial summit. Then participants go downhill over snowfields and rock fields, waterfalls and crags until they reach the finish line back on the streets of Seward. Tom Walsh, a race steward, saw Michael ascending to the turnaround point with about 200 feet to go. At this point, the area was getting foggy and cold, but Walsh saw no reason to be concerned about the condition of the runner. Walsh asked Lemaitre for his bib number, and he replied 548. And as he descended back towards the town, he texted race officials, bib number 548 would be home in about an hour and a half. Unfortunately, that was the last time Michael was ever seen. Mountain rescue experts, firemen, state troopers, search dogs, and Michael's family spent thousands of combined hours searching the area without a single clue ever being found. And even after the official search was called off, volunteers continued to search the mountain, but to no avail. Now, what are some of the reasons that people think the Alaskan Triangle exists? One of the most common is the severe weather and harsh landscape. Alaska has vast swaths of remote wilderness. Over half of the entire nation's federally designated wilderness, recognized by the Wilderness Act passed in 1964, around 57 million acres of it are in Alaska, with even more that is not specifically designated as protected land, and much of this land is nearly completely untouched by humans. This harsh landscape is full of all manner of perils, including unforgiving weather, hazardous terrain, dangerous wild animals, and harrowing geological dangers, with Alaska being the home of around 100 active volcanoes. Considering this massive amount of rugged wilderness, which riddled with countless potential hazards, and the fact that many tourists come here to camp and hike are unprepared, It's perhaps no surprise that a good amount of people may become lost in the middle of nowhere, encounter some danger that incapacitates them and prevents them from getting back to civilization, or just simply killed by wild animals or the elements. Due to its reputation, parts of Alaska can get pretty toasty during the summer. Much of the state recently endured a stretch of temperatures you'd more commonly see in Minnesota than in Alaska. Fairbanks, a city that's geographically planted just right of center in the state's otherwise unpopulated wilderness, recorded 2 high temperatures of 88 degrees Fahrenheit earlier this month. The city has recorded highs of 80 degrees or warmer 10 times since June 1st. Average highs in Fairbanks range from the upper 60s in June to the mid-70s in July, normally. This month also saw the all-time record warmest temperature ever recorded so close to the Arctic Ocean, with a small town in far northern Alaska reached a daytime high of 84 Fahrenheit. Since warm, unstable air is the fuel that feeds a thunderstorm, talking about the warmth in Alaska helps us understand how common severe thunderstorms can be there. The state is no stranger to thunderstorms. During the heat wave earlier in the month, lightning monitors detected tens of thousands of lightning strikes across the state during the 2-week period. Cold weather, of course, happens too. Fairbanks dropped to 50 below zero for the first time in 5 years recently, with Anchorage climatologist Brian Brettschneider saying, triggering spooky ice fog across the city. Ice fog occurs when tiny ice particles are suspended in the air when temperatures fall lower than about 22 below zero. Now, is it possible that there are aliens in Alaska and within this triangle? According to the National UFO Reporting Center, since 1998, there have been over 560 reported UFO sightings in Alaska, with the majority of the sightings being in, you guessed it, the Alaskan Triangle. There are claims of a large alien base in Alaska. In his 1997 book, Remote Viewers, Jim Schnabel told the story of the U.S. intelligence community's involvement in the controversial issue of psychic spying that largely began in the early to mid-70s. Commenting on the skills of a talented remote viewer in relation to matters of UFO nature, one Pat Price, Schnabel noted Price was of the opinion that Alaska's Mount Hayes, the jewel of a glacial range northeast of Anchorage, housed one of the aliens' largest bases. According to Pat Price, the aliens that live deep inside Mount Hayes are very good-looking, differing only in their heart, lungs, blood, and eyes. Ominously, he added that the aliens use thought transfer for motor control of us. Price added, the site has also been responsible for strange activity and malfunction of U.S. and Soviet space objects. Rather notably, despite the controversial nature of this story, we find that the U.S. military took a great deal of interest in tales of UFO activity in Alaska in the formative years of the subject. For example, formerly classified FBI files tell of startling encounters with UFOs in Alaska in the period from 1947 to 1950. It was in August of 47 that a highly impressive account of UFO incident involving 2 serving members of the military was supplied to the FBI at Anchorage. The report began, this is to advise that 2 Army officers reported to the Office of the Director of Intelligence Headquarters, Alaskan Department, at Fort Richardson, Alaska, that they had witnessed an object passing through the air at a tremendous rate of speed, which could not be judged as 2 miles per hour. According to the official report, the UFO was initially sighted by only one of the 2 officers, but he soon alerted his colleague to the strange sight. The object appeared to be shaped like a sphere and did not give the impression of being saucer-like or comparable to a disc. The first officer stated that it would be impossible to give minute details concerning the object, but that it appeared to be approximately 2 or 3 feet in diameter and did not leave any vapor trail in the sky. Being the experienced officer that he was, in his first attempt to gauge the altitude of the object and from a comparison with cloud formations in the area, he determined that whatever the nature of the mystery sphere, it was cruising at a height of more than 10,000 feet. And it should be noted that to be at such a height and still be visible, in all probability, the UFO must have exceeded by a wide margin his initial size estimate of 2 or 3 feet. When questioned, the second officer gave a substantially similar account, the only marked difference being that, in his opinion, he considered the object to have been approximately 10 feet in diameter and compared it to half the size of a full moon on an ordinary night. This discrepancy in size was apparently due to the fact that the second officer believed the UFO was more likely to have been at a height of 3,000 to 4,000 feet, rather than at an altitude of 10,000 feet, as had been suggested by his colleague. The difference of opinion over the altitude and size of the object may or may not have been of significance. The important factor, however, was that both officers agreed that some type of anomalous object had most definitely been spotted. And, as the report concluded, the second officer pointed out that one of the remarkable features of this report was that it was definitely traveling against the wind. Shortly afterwards, the FBI office at Anchorage reported to Bureau Director J. Edgar Hoover that we have been able to locate a flyer who observed some flying object near Bethel, Alaska in July 1947. The report to Hoover continued, the pilot related that the occasion of seeing the flying object near Bethel was on a July day when the sky was completely clear of clouds, and it being during the early part, it is daylight the entire night. The time of his sighting of this flying object was about 10 p.m., and the sun had just dropped beyond the horizon. Flying weather was extremely good, and he was coming into Bethel Airport with a DC-3. On approaching the airport, the pilot was amazed to see to his left an unidentified craft the size of a C-54 without any fuselage, he says, which seemed to resemble a flying wing. As a result of its unique shape, the pilot was initially unable to determine whether the object was heading towards his aircraft or away from it, and elected to make a 45-degree turn in an attempt to defuse any possible chance of collision. The FBI had noted that the pilot was certain that the craft was free of any external power source, such as a propeller-driven engine, and exhibited no exhaust as it flew by. The document adds, he called on his radio to the Civil Aeronautics Administration station at Bethel, asking what aircraft was in the vicinity, and they had no reports of any. The object he sighted was some 5 or 10 miles from the airport before his arrival, and he stated that the path did not go directly across the airport. He, of course, could not tell where the object was making any noise, and stated that it was flying at 1,000-foot altitude and estimated travel in excess of 300 miles per hour. It was traveling in the direction from Bethel to Nome, which is a northwesterly direction. He noted no radio interference and is unable to describe the color other than it appeared dark but of definite shape and did not blend into the sky, but had a definite, concise outline. He clearly observed the object at this time. As the 1940s drew to a close and a new decade dawned, the FBI continued to receive and log high-quality UFO reports on a regular basis. Of those, one of the more credible related to a noteworthy series of encounters that occurred in Alaskan airspace over the course of 2 days in early 1950. Forwarded to the FBI by an official U.S. Navy source, the confidential 3-page intelligence report paints a startling picture of multiple UFO encounters involving the military. Titled Unidentified Phenomena in Vicinity of Kodiak, Alaska. It concerns a report of sightings of unidentified airborne objects by various naval personnel on 22 and 23 January 1950. The author of the report noted at 22-0240W, January, Lieutenant Smith, USN, Patrol Plane Commander of P2V3 No. 4 of Patrol Squadron 1, reported an unidentified radar contact 20 miles north of the Naval Air Station, Kodiak, Alaska. When this contact was first made, Lieutenant Smith was flying the Kodiak Security Patrol. At 0243W, 8 minutes later, a radar contact was made on an object 10 miles southeast of NAS Kodiak. Lieutenant Smith checked in with the control tower to determine known traffic in the area and was informed that there was none. During this period, the radar operator, Gaske, ALC, USN, reported intermittent radar interference of a type never before experienced. Contact was lost at this time, but intermittent interference continued. Now, Smith and Gaske were not the only two to report that unidentified vehicles had intruded into Alaskan airspace. At the time of these encounters, the USS Tilbrook was anchored in the vicinity of Buoy 19 in the nearby Manship Canal. On board the Tilbrook was a seaman named Morgan, first name unknown, who was standing watch. At some point between 0200 and 0300 hours, Morgan reported that a very fast-moving red light, which appeared to be of exhaust nature, seemed to come from the southeast, moved clockwise in a large circle in the direction of and around Kodiak, and returned out in a generally southeast direction. Perhaps not believing what he was seeing, Morgan alerted one of his shipmates, Carver, to the strange spectacle, and both watched as the UFO made a return flight. According to the testimony of both Morgan and Carver, the object was in sight for an estimated 30 seconds, no odor or sound was detected, and the object was described to the appearance of a ball of fire about 1 foot in diameter. The report then records yet another encounter with the mystery visitor. At 2:20-440W, conducting routine Kodiak security patrol, Lieutenant Smith reported a visual sighting of an unidentified airborne object at a range of 5 miles on the starboard bow. This object showed indications of great speed on the radar scope. The trailing edge of the blip gave a tail-like indication. Lieutenant Smith quickly advised the rest of the crew of the PV-23 number 24 that the UFO was in sight, and all watched fascinated as the strange vehicle soared overhead at a speed estimated to have been around 1,800 miles per hour. Smith climbed to intercept the UFO and vainly tried to circle it. Needless to say, its high speed and remarkable maneuverability ensured that Smith's actions were futile. However, neither Lieutenant Smith nor his crew was quite prepared for what happened next. Subsequently, the object seemed to be opening the range, the official report reads, and Smith attempted to close the range. The UFO was observed to open out somewhat, then to turn to the left and come up on Smith's quarter. Smith considered this to be a highly threatening gesture and turned out all lights in the aircraft. 4 minutes later, the object disappeared from view in a southeasterly direction. At around 0400 hours on the following day, Lieutenants Barco and Causer of Patrol Squadron 1 were conducting the Kodiak security patrol when they, too, sighted an unidentified aerial vehicle. At the time of their encounter, the aircraft in which the officers were flying was approximately 62 miles south of Kodiak. For 10 minutes, Barco and Causer, along with the pilot, Captain Paulson, watched stunned as the mysterious object twisted and turned in the Alaskan sky. An assessment of these reports read thus. Number 1, to Lieutenant Smith and crew, it appeared as 2 orange lights rotating around a common center, like 2 jet aircraft making slow rolls in tight formation. It had a wide speed range. 2, to Morgan and Carver, it appeared as a reddish-orange ball of fire about 1 foot in diameter, traveling at a high rate of speed. 3, to Causer, Barco, and Paulson, it appeared to be a pulsating orange-yellow projectile-shaped flame with regular periods of pulsation on 3 to 5 seconds. Later, as the object increased the range, the pulsations appeared to increase to on 7 or 8 seconds and off 7 or 8 seconds. The final comment on the encounter reads, in view of the fact that no weather balloons were known to have been released within a reasonable time before the sightings, it appears that the object or objects were not balloons. If not balloons, the objects must be regarded as phenomena, possibly meteorites, the exact nature of which could not be determined by this office. The meteorite theory for this series of encounters is particularly puzzling. It goes without saying that meteorites do not stay in sight for an estimated 30 seconds. Meteorites do not close in on military aircraft in what is deemed to be a highly threatening gesture, and they do not appear as 2 orange lights rotating about a common center. In other words, it seems safe to conclude that genuinely anomalous phenomena were indeed witnessed by experienced military personnel at Kodiak, Alaska in January of 1950. Now, does any of this prove that there really is an alien base deep within Alaska's Mount Hayes, as Pat Price suggests? No, of course not. But in view of all the above, perhaps it's time to take a closer look at Price's claims, just in case. Now, in regards to Bigfoot, with the huge amounts of forests and uncharted wilderness, Alaska is certainly a perfect location for Bigfoot, also known as Sasquatch, to hide out. There are numerous reports of Bigfoot sightings throughout the entire state. Some reports include evidence of nesting sites, a possible Bigfoot skeleton, and unidentified hair samples. Some witnesses have even reported seeing a swimming Sasquatch during their encounters. Some villages have even relocated as a result of terrifying encounters with Bigfoot, which is surprising because the common understanding is that the creature prefers isolated areas and is in general quite peaceful. Peterson. There were stories told from 1900 to 1925 about a trapper that went into the woods near Peterson and disappeared, shortly after reporting exceptionally large tracks in the snow. The strangest story ever told, by Virginia Culp, documents this incredibly eerie encounter in further detail. In the town of Ruby, in 1943, it was reported that a man was attacked by an unknown creature in the wilderness about 18 miles down the Yukon from the town of Ruby. He later died of internal injuries, and the creature that attacked him, presumably a Bigfoot, was said to be run off by his dog team. Bristol Bay. In 1940, near the town of Kaluka, a group of ladies was berry picking when they reportedly came upon a large, man-like creature with long hair running down its back. They later went on to capture this creature, cage it, and feed it. It later died, and the story was documented in a letter from the alleged cage keeper. Ketchikan. This southwest town holds some pretty wild tales of the past. In 1956, about 50 miles southwest of Ketchikan, a man that was out fishing reported seeing an 8-foot-tall creature that was around 400 pounds and walked on 2 feet like an ape. There was also a young boy that reported a similar sighting nearby in 1960 and reacted to the encounter by screaming and running off as fast as possible. Port Chatham, also known as Portlock, this eerie small village on the Kenai Peninsula was home to so many Bigfoot sightings that the entire population eventually fled due to an overwhelming amount of fear. For a period of time during the 1900s, torn-up bodies were washing up on the shores of this small village, making the people believe that it had to be the evil Sasquatch spirits that roamed the woods nearby. Wrangell. Multiple Bigfoot sightings occurred in this area during the early 1900s. One includes a man that was berry picking in the woods and was awakened by the sounds of a massive man-like creature having a conversation nearby. Another story in the area is about a tall Bigfoot creature that actually ended up carrying a 3-year-old back to her home after she wandered off into the woods without anyone noticing her. Now, if Bigfoot is as confrontational as people in Alaska claim it to be, it's a possibility that this creature is perhaps the reason why some people go missing there, especially in the wilderness, if they have come face to face with it. Now, what about the energy vortices that are supposedly found in Alaska? The Alaskan Triangle comprises one of these so-called vile vortices, or geographical areas around the planet, postulated by American researcher and cryptozoologist Ivan T. Sanderson. Vile vortices are claimed to exhibit extreme electric, magnetic, and electromagnetic anomalies, as well as energy vortex called ley lines, which are theorized subterranean electromagnetic currents. The most famous vile vortices is the notorious Bermuda Triangle, but they are also said to exist in places as far-flung as the Algerian megaliths to the south of Timbuktu, the Indus Valley in Pakistan, Hamakulia volcano in Hawaii, the Devil's Sea near Japan, the South Atlantic, and both the North and South Poles. Various famous places such as Stonehenge, Easter Island, and the pyramids of Egypt are all said to lie on vortexes, and indeed it is claimed by some to be the reason these monuments were erected in the first place. These energy vortexes are said to create all sorts of strange phenomena. They are thought to affect humans in various physical, mental, and emotional ways, such as causing visions, demonstrating miraculous powers of healing, and generating spurts of creativity or profound epiphanies. Many people believe that they can tap into their higher selves while at these vortexes. These places can also allegedly induce disorientation, confusion, and both visual and auditory hallucinations, as well as cause delicate electrical instrumentation to go haywire or to completely malfunction. More far-out theories on energy vortexes are that they are actually doorways into spiritual dimensions, or maybe even gateways to other realms. All of these things could explain why people in vehicles such as ships or airplanes go missing in these regions at an astonishing rate. There are some interesting things that seem to support the idea that the Alaskan Triangle could be one of these vortexes. Alaska is covered with a large concentration of magnetic anomalies, some of which can disrupt compasses to the point that they are off as much as 30 degrees. In addition, some search and rescue workers in the area have reported having auditory hallucinations there, most commonly described as sounding like an angry swarm of bees and of feeling unusually disoriented or lightheaded. Some readings of areas in the supposed Alaskan Triangle have indeed produced various unusual anomalies and spikes of electromagnetic activity. Could this have anything to do with the disappearances? Unfortunately, it's unclear whether such vile vortices even truly exist, and the theory has been open to a good amount of skepticism, so it is hard to say for sure. Something else in Alaska that may be responsible for taking people is what's known as the Tlingit shape-shifting demon. Now, there are many theories regarding all these disappearances in the Alaskan Triangle, and one of them includes the evil spirits associated with the native Tlingit people who live in this area. These people are said to have origins dating back to 11,000 years ago. Their name, Tlingit, means people of the tides. These people believe that there is a shape-shifting demon named Kushtaka who is a cross between a man and an otter. It is said to lure people to their impending doom by attracting lost people to the water by portraying children or women who are screaming for help. It is also said that when the Kushtaka, also known as the Otter Man, captures these lost people, it then steals their souls. It is folklore that has never been proven, of course, but it's still a frightening thought, to say the least. Something else to consider in Alaska? animal attacks. Although moose aren't more dangerous than bears necessarily in terms of behavior, they pose a greater threat of injuring you simply because of their population size. Moose outnumber bears nearly 3 to 1 in Alaska, wounding around 5 to 10 people in the state annually. That's more than the grizzly bear and black bear attacks combined. From 1997 to 2017, there were a total of 24 fatal bear attacks in North America. 4 of these were in Alaska. The average age of those attacked? 41. The youngest was 5 months old, and the oldest was a 93-year-old female. Overall, there were only 10 fatal bear attacks in Alaska if you count black, brown, polar, and grizzly bears. What about human predators? That brings us to the Nome serial killer. Around 2005, people began to notice that a large percentage of residents or tourists who went missing in Alaska happened to disappear from the city of Nome. In fact, the numbers became so worrying that rumors of a serial killer began to run rampant throughout local topics of conversation, totally ruining the vibe. This loud panic eventually caught the ear of the FBI, who came rushing in to investigate, eager to catch a murderer and show him off to their friends. But they didn't find one. Instead, they concluded that it was Nome's fault all along. You see, Alaska is known to have one of the highest ratio of alcohol-free municipalities in America. But Nome loves to party, which is the very reason why so many people flock to the city in the first place. So now you have a bunch of drunk visitors wandering off alone, into the woods to take a pee maybe, and then suddenly they get eaten by a bear, or stolen by aliens, or seduced by the otter man, or they simply pass out and freeze to death. So at this time, there has been no evidence supporting that there is a serial killer on the loose in Nome, Alaska. Hello friends, Steve Stockton here with you. Welcome to our latest video. Today, we bring you the strange story of missing people, lost gold, in the Superstition Mountains. Join me. Let's take a walk and see. Now, I first became aware of the Superstition Mountains in 1978 when author Jim Brandon published a book called Weird America, A Guide to Places of Mystery in the United States. This seminal work in the area of the paranormal, the strange, gives a state-by-state breakdown of all kinds of weird happenings. Here's what Jim had to write about the superstitions, quoting here, 40 miles due east from the neon vinyl motels and nineries of the Phoenix Van Buren Street is a sort of heart of darkness. The name mountains is only one of the deceptions of this spiky huddle of volcanic extrusions raking up from the floor of the hostile desert. Old-timers in the area can tell you more. Little white clouds that suddenly materialize and follow the wanderer, freak gales that spring up while you're inching along some narrow rock ledge, and all sorts of psycho-atmospheric effects in the best Castaneda tradition that die away immediately if you leave some apparently sensitive area. Jim continues, quote, longtime seekers of the dazzling treasures believe hidden here. Of course, there are treasures, half a dozen of them, including the Lost Dutchman mine, which we'll get to in a moment, swear that there are certain caves and rocks that simply cannot be photographed. And then there's the whole question of Native Americans. Some claim that they have never seen one in the area. Others are equally sure they have seen many, all pygmies. The Native Americans themselves are pretty well agreed that the abode of the supreme evil forces of the Southwest live in the superstition. The Pima and Maricopa steer a wide course around the mountains, thinking that entering them means immediate death or diabolical possession. Now, the Apache do not avoid the entire area, but only certain places that they too regard as hideously evil. Students of little-known Apache folklore believe that the chief medicine place is a secret cave, possibly on the peak known as Geronimo's Head. Another possible spot, they say, is Needle Canyon, which is near Weaver's Needle. We'll get to that in a minute. Apache spokesmen have recently revealed this much, that the tribe believes it is in a special relationship with the mountain spirits, a secret society of strange beings who do special work. For the Apache, these sacred mountains are a sort of gateway to the hereafter, through which the souls of the dead must pass, and it is the function of the mountain spirits to guide them. The Native Americans help by protecting the area from white desecration. End quote. That's a local saying that many people who go into the mountains are not the same when they come out. This may have very well been the case with an eccentric German immigrant of the 19th century named Jacob Waltz, although this Dutchman does seem to have hit pay dirt of sufficient enough richness that generations of treasure hunters have swarmed over this pile of rocks looking for his lost gold mine. Beyond that, there are at least 3 other major treasures and as many minor ones, Geronimo's treasure, the Jesuit treasure, and the Peralta treasure, which we'll get to shortly. That treasure is also the link to one of the most forbidding part of the superstition's evil repute. The Peraltas, a prominent family from Sonora, discovered fabulous gold lodes here in 1830, but were wiped out along with their crews by the Apache in 1848. Estimates of that slaughter number anywhere from 68 to 400. In the 20th century alone, there were 36 known deaths and disappearances in this area. Despite some of these being solved, author Kurt Gentry points out in his book The Killer Mountains, this still leaves a huge number of unexplained deaths and disappearances for such a sparsely populated area. One of the stranger aspects is the method of these demises. A great number of these involved decapitation. Apparently this began in 1896 with the death of a slightly deranged but harmless mountain man named Elijah Rivas. In recent years, says Kurt Gentry, these unexplained deaths and disappearances have been increasing. Now remember, he wrote this many years ago, but he closes with this observation. There's something important in this particular area. What? Now, Jim Brandon's book, Weird America, it is long out of print. As of this recording, there's one used copy available on Amazon for the princely sum of $459. I'm fortunate enough to have a signed copy that I bought in 1978. It's one of my most treasured books. If you can find a copy, it's worth checking out. But I digress. Let us continue. Now, the Superstition Mountains get their name from old Pima Indian legends, and the name itself aptly describes this mysterious place, which, as I stated, has been the subject of many strange mysteries, phantoms, and legends since ancient times. According to many Native Americans in the area, the mountains themselves are believed to hold the entrance to the underworld. Many of the cliff dwellings and caves are also ancient and actually show signs that at one time they were occupied. Though no one knows for sure who it was that actually occupied these caves and other dwellings, there are many theories on the subject. Whoever it was, the mountains became a bastion for the Apache tribe sometime in the 1800s. Earlier, I mentioned the Peralta family said that in the 1840s they came from northern New Mexico and developed rich gold mines somewhere in the Superstition Mountains. In 1848, the last expedition to export gold from the mountains and back to Mexico was undertaken, but those people were ambushed, according to the legends, by the Apache tribe. Only one or two of the people on this expedition, all members of the Peralta family, managed to escape, and even today, this area is still known as the Massacre Grounds. Now, there are a few people who are alleged to have known the location of these mines, and there have been more than a few maps that have surfaced out there throughout the years. However, when someone would ask questions in order to go and find these mines, the alleged maps would somehow have gone missing or otherwise not be able to be located anymore. On top of this mystery surrounding the maps, men who have claimed to have found the mines are never actually able to point out to anyone where they were or were able to make their own way back to them. Otherwise, these same men would often claim that some strange disaster had happened before they were able to make any sort of claim on the gold or the mines themselves. All this, when put together, adds to the legend and lore of there being a lost mine or mines somewhere in this strange, mysterious mountain range. Now, the aforementioned Dutchman, German native Jacob Waltz that I mentioned, back in the 1870s, he claimed he had somehow contacted a descendant of the Peralta family and that they showed him where the mine was. The Dutchman's claim was that he actually knew the location of the mine. Along with his partner, Jacob Weiser, the two claimed to have not only worked in the actual mine, but they'd also hidden away a few caches of gold in the superstitions. Now, most of these legends have the caches hidden near a place called Weaver's Needle, which is a fairly well-known landmark that I mentioned earlier as near one of the places where the spirits supposedly dwell. However, it seems as though some bad luck befell the two almost right away, depending on which story you choose to set store by. As some say the Apaches killed Jacob Weiser, but many believe it was actually the Dutchman, Jacob Waltz, himself, who murdered his partner to keep the gold and possibly the secret of where the mines were, for and to himself. Later, though, due to his failing health, Jacob Waltz ended up having to stop mining gold and going on adventures and moved to Phoenix to live out the rest of his life. He passed away in 1891, allegedly having only revealed the location of the mine to one other person, a woman named Julia Thomas, who was a neighbor of Jacob's and cared for him when his health made it so he could no longer care for himself. She claimed that he had not only shared with her the location of the mine, but also the location of the caches of gold that he and his ill-fated partner had hidden some 20 years earlier. She even claimed he drew her a map, but admits that she just saw it as a bunch of scribbling and was unsure what to do with it or make of it. So she sold it for a measly $7. However, in the following years, there were dozens upon dozens of seekers of the mine and the caches, Julia included, and as far as is known, not a single one of them was ever able to find either one. This is when the mine seems to first become known as the Lost Dutchman's Mine, and more people would go on throughout the years to traverse the dangerous paths and trails in and along these mountains, searching caves and other dangerous areas, only to come up completely empty-handed. In fact, many of these intrepid treasure hunters not only met their demise, but many with some sort of foul play or another suspected in the process. Again, these sometimes strange deaths seem to some to lead credence to the stories, legends, and superstitions of not only the Lost Dutchman's Mine and the curse allegedly attached to it, but to the strange Superstition Mountains themselves. Now let's take a look at some of the strange disappearances surrounding the hunt for this elusive mine and the treasure it's said to contain. The Lost Dutchman's Gold Mine is one of the most famous mysteries in the United States, so it should come as no surprise that so many people go out each year and search for it in earnest, despite all the aforementioned strange and somewhat spooky legends that surround it and the Superstition Mountains themselves. Rumor has it that approximately 600 people have lost their lives or gone missing in search of these treasures. Are these people out of their minds, following what could simply be the delirious ramblings of an old man who knew he was so close to death? Or should they be considered as ambitious dream chasers in pursuit of wealth beyond anything they could imagine? We'll leave that one up for you to decide. Now, the aforementioned massacre that happened in 1848 regarding the Peralta family, these people are said to have discovered the Dutchman's Mine right within the Superstition Mountains, where most people believe it to be. The problem with that is, did they actually find it? Could it be the alleged superstition's curse? As they set out on what should have otherwise been a routine gold mining expedition, the entire family was slain by the Apache Indian tribe. They were said to have been ambushed, and any gold the family had on them is said to have been hidden right then and there by the same tribe. There's also a man named Jesse Kappen, who was said to have allowed the Lost Dutchman's Mine to become an obsession for him. Jesse became convinced that he would somehow be the one to not only locate the mine itself, but the one who would gain the spoils of it as well. Wealth and riches beyond anyone's wildest dreams had entranced Jesse. He was absolutely enthralled with finding the mine. Jesse was a night bellman at a hotel and was affectionately called the Gentle Giant by those who knew him best. In November of 2009, he had finally saved up enough money and vacation time to go on and pursue his dream of finding the lost, legendary treasure. Jerry traded in his car for a Jeep and told his mother that he would call her as soon as he could. But the first call she received wasn't from her son, but from the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. Jesse's new Jeep and his camp had been found, seemingly abandoned, on Tortilla Mountain. There was no sign of the 35-year-old, and an investigation into his whereabouts quickly ensued. Countless books on the subject and maps littered his apartment when it was searched after he disappeared. It was also found, through the examination of many files on his computer, that he had already gone on 2 other excursions in an attempt to locate it, but with no luck. He hadn't told anyone of these adventures, and it was news to all who knew him when it finally came out. At the devastatingly young age of just 35, Jesse would become another victim of the lost mine when he went on his 3rd trip out into the Tonto National Forest, located in the Superstition Wilderness, back in 2009. Despite there being a very large-scale investigation into what had happened to him, it took 3 years for his remains to be located and identified. Volunteers with the Superstition Search and Rescue Organization found Jesse's remains wedged inside of a tiny crevice or opening that seemed no fully grown human being would ever have been able to fit into. It's theorized that perhaps he somehow fell from a ledge directly above where he was eventually found, 180 feet in the ground. There's never been any proof of this, and the official cause of death could not be determined. There's also the fact that his remains were found in such a tiny and thin place that even animals in flooding couldn't touch him. There was no trauma to his skull, and the authorities and everyone else were left to wonder and speculate did just that. What happened to Jesse Kappen on this trip that was so different from the previous 2 he'd taken? And why was he going in secret every time? And how did he get wedged into such a tiny spot in which he was eventually found? Is it possible that Jesse had in fact found the treasure and maybe was hiding it down there in that impossibly tiny crevice when something happened to him? Sure, anything is possible, but we will most likely never know what that something was, if anything, and what we're left with is nothing but rumor and conjecture, which adds even more mystery to the Lost Dutchman legend. Back in June of 1931, Dr. Adolf Ruth took 2 weeks to go and search for the treasure and ended up becoming yet another victim. Dr. Ruth was a veterinarian from Washington, D.C., and it's said that his disappearance was what sparked many of the modern-day legends about the gold and the mountains themselves. This was the first nationally reported story regarding someone disappearing in search of the treasure, and many believe that had it not been for the Great Depression, perhaps this story would have been but a mere blip on the radar of a depressed and oppressed nation. However, it seems that reading about a treasure hunter with a mysterious map, despite the fact that he died in the process of trying to locate it, seemed much more appealing for Americans to read about than the dire state of the nation at the time. Dr. Ruth had, by some unknown means, allegedly gotten his hands on a treasure map that led to the Lost Dutchman's gold that is said to have dated back to the period of the Mexican Revolution, which took place between 1909 and 1923. Irwin Cleve Ruth, Dr. Adolph Ruth's son, had acquired a copy of the map as a seemingly generous reward for saving the life of a Mexican officer and handed it off to his father as a gift. Now, Adolph had almost lost his life at least once, searching for other allegedly lost treasures across the country, and this certainly wasn't his first time doing this sort of thing. He had suffered severe injuries and brushes with death a few times, but wasn't the least bit deterred. In fact, it was while he was in the hospital recuperating from one such accident that he started planning his search for the fabled Lost Dutchman mine. Sometime in mid-May of 1931, Dr. Ruth was able to convince a couple of men, more specifically 2 cowboy/prospectors, to help him with his quest. These men worked at what was then known as the Quarter Circle U Ranch, and against the advice of the ranch's owner, these 2 men agreed to pack him up and lead him into the mountains. Their names were Leroy Purnell and Jack Keenan, and they packed Dr. Ruth into a place called Willow Springs in West Boulder Canyon around June 14, 1931. It was only a short time later that Dr. Ruth disappeared. The owner of the Quarter Circle U Ranch, a man named Tex Barkley, rode into Adolph's camp on June 20, 1931, and upon examining the site, determined the doctor hadn't been there in at least a full 24 hours. Tex alerted the authorities, and an intense and large-scale search lasted 45 days, and eventually he was tracked from Willow Springs to a point on the east slope of Blacktop Mesa. On December 10, 1931, a skull was found and was quickly able to be identified as that of Adolph Ruth. Deputy Sheriff Jeff Adams and ranch owner Tex Barkley found the remainder of the doctor's skeleton a little over a month later in January of 1932. It was found in a small tributary on the eastern slope of Blacktop Mesa. The map, which has now come to be known as the Ruth Peralta map, was found in his camp, and the newspaper, the Arizona Republic, published a copy of it. Now, the Maricopa and Pinal County Sheriff's offices both agree that Dr. Adolph Ruth wasn't murdered, as so many people have implied since his remains were found, but that he most likely died of dehydration and starvation, which technically made his death determined to be natural causes, at least officially. Many people believe that because his skull was found so far removed from the rest of his body that he must have been decapitated. But those rumors were said to have been put to rest with the explanation of coyotes and other animals, as well as post-mortem predation and activity. However, there are still those who believe thoroughly that something more sinister than being unprepared or perhaps becoming lost befell Dr. Ruth. Regardless of what actually happened to him, it's another tragedy nonetheless that can be attributed to the seeking of this one particular treasure. And despite the tragedy of Dr. Ruth being an extremely public ordeal, especially for the time, it didn't stop other people from going in search of this alleged vast vein of riches, just waiting to be claimed up there somewhere in the mountains. In fact, it's almost as though these strange disappearances and unexplained deaths helped to lure more people to it. Sometime in the 1940s, a 62-year-old treasure hunter by the name of James Cravey took to the mountains on his own quest for the lost gold. Unfortunately, and quite bizarrely, he also came to the fate of having met his demise, also with his head being found separated and far removed from his body. James didn't keep his travels secret like so many before him, though, and his journey to find the mine was a big deal. He made sure his search for the gold was the biggest spectacle yet. Before he boarded the helicopter, which he had hired to drop him off in the mountains, he told many of his friends and family, and basically anyone who would listen to him, that he knew the exact location of the mine and that he would be in and out in no time. He gave the helicopter pilot who dropped him off the coordinates for where to pick him up in 10 days' time, as this was how long he had planned to be there. No more, no less than 10 days, and he would come out of it wealthy beyond his wildest dreams. Of course, when the helicopter did return for James, he was nowhere in sight. To this day, nobody really knows what happened to him, but it's presumed that he was slain due to the aforementioned fact that his head was found separated from his shoulders, but there isn't any evidence one way or the other. His camp was found intact and with only 2 days of his food and supplies having been used. Then in early 1952, a man from Dayton, Ohio named Joseph Kelly took his turn meeting his demise in search of the treasure, and it seems as though he just disappeared off the face of the earth. That is, until 2 years later, when his remains were found. Upon further examination, it was concluded that he had been shot in the head, but no more information has ever been learned as to who killed him, when, or why. Later that same year, 2 young men from California went in search of the treasure and were never seen or heard from again. No remains have ever been found, and their case remains a mystery of the mountain like so many that came before and after. It's said that the only thing more mysterious than James Kidd's disappearance while searching for the Dutchman's gold was his life in general. James had very little family and even fewer friends. He had what has been described as a ridiculous sum of money, most of which he acquired through investing. No one could ever figure out, and James never told, where he got the initial cash to make those investments in the first place, though. It is interesting to note here that James is also said to have come and gone from the Superstition Mountains quite regularly, often making very short trips, though he of course never explained to anyone what he was doing when he went on these many excursions. Speculation ran rampant after he disappeared that perhaps he'd found the treasure and was going to and from it and taking small amounts as he needed, and that's how he really built his fortune. Though he was reported as missing on December 29, 1949, it's said that he'd been gone for a very long time at this point, but there was no one in his life that he was close enough to that would have noticed or even cared that he was no longer around. A few years after his disappearance, it was found that James Kidd had left behind a fortune of $500,000. In today's money, that would amount to somewhere around $10.5 million US. Quite bizarrely, it's unknown whatever happened to this massive fortune, because the stipulation for anyone to be left this money is that they had to be able to definitively prove the existence of ghosts. An avid lifelong believer in all things paranormal and supernatural, the few who did know him in any capacity were not surprised when this news came out. Most people believed that he was simply killed for his gold, or that someone had followed him up into the mountains that last time, maybe even the man who is said to have dropped him off from the helicopter there in the first place. But again, nobody knows. The man who brought him here also met with him once a month to check on him and make sure he had ample supplies to be able to continue on, so it seems he was making a longer trek than usual that last time. It's still unknown what became of him, and no remains or clues have ever been found. Now here it should be noted that between the years of 1955 and 1978, multiple skulls with bullet holes in them were found in the mountains. Aside from those we've already discussed here, there were at least an additional 2 cadavers found without their heads, but in these cases, the skulls were never found. The actual cause of death for these 2, and so many more unfortunate people who ended up as nothing but remains in the superstitions, are still unknown. Another unfortunate soul who was unknowingly destined to end up another statistic of the mountains and the gold had allegedly hid so well, and also one of the owners of the headless corpse mentioned above, was a man named Jay Clapp. Jay spent more than a decade going in and out of the superstitions and trying to plot his way through in search of the Dutchman's treasure, before seeming to simply vanish into thin air in July of 1961. There have never been any clues or leads as to what could have become of him, and to this day, his skull has never been located. Interestingly, and somewhat bizarrely, his body was found near Weaver's Needle, which is the exact same place that said the Dutchman himself had hidden his gold caches. Elisha Rivas, who I mentioned earlier, was definitely an interesting character. He settled into the Superstition Mountains in 1872 and was quickly, and some say aptly, nicknamed the Madman of the Mountains. He convinced the local Native American tribes in the area where he chose to settle that he was an absolute lunatic by running around naked throughout the canyons while wielding knives. Now, the natives weren't the only ones who chose to stay clear of this madman, and he is said to have lived a very solitary and somewhat quiet life on the mountains until one day he just wasn't there anymore. Now, it's unknown how long he'd been missing before his remains were found some 24 years later in 1896, but they were very badly decomposed. Then there were 2 men who are only described as Easterners who are said to have gone out looking for the elusive and deadly treasure the same year Elisha Reeves' remains were found. Nobody knows what became of them either. No trace of them has ever been found. Then, in April of 1958, another mystery was added to the ever-growing list of mountain victims when a deserted campsite was found somewhere on the northern outskirts. The scene was pretty dreadful, with bed skirts, sheets, and blankets described as having been soaked with blood found left behind. Along with the bloody bedclothes, there were cooking tools, a Geiger counter, cleaning supplies, and what appears to be personal letters. It's still unknown whether there was simply one person or several people who occupied this camp, and this is mainly because someone had taken the time to tear the names and addresses from the letters effectively leaving no trace as to who resided there or any other personal relevant information about them. No body or bodies were ever found either, and it's simply marked down as another tragic mystery of this whole bigger puzzle that the mountains and the alleged lost treasure hold. Also, in 1910, in a cave high up on the Superstitions, the skeletal remains of a woman who is said to have been clutching a small sack of gold was found. There were no remnants of any clothing and nothing to allude to what happened to her in the first place. Quite honestly, it's said as though it simply looked like she had found some gold and simply perished right then and there on the spot with no explanation at all. These are the types of mysteries that surround places like the Superstition Mountains. The Lost Dutchman's mine has become something of a legend in pop culture. It's been the subject of many books and even TV shows since it all began so very long ago. To this day, there are people who are obsessed with the alleged maps and cracking the codes and discovering the secrets within in order to find the treasure. As far as what's been actually proven, though, we still don't know if anyone has ever actually found it and whether or not it ever existed at all in the first place. What about all of the mysterious disappearances and strange deaths? How do we explain all the bodies found in such bizarre states of being, and the overall seeming bad luck that no doubt surrounds not only the legend, but those who go in search of it? Even if we only take all the skulls that have been found throughout the years with bullets in them, it would seem as though at least someone were trying to keep something a secret out there in the Superstitions. What that something is, though, nobody really knows. It does seem a great number of these unexplained disappearances and strange deaths circle around people who are out in search of the treasure, and it's for that very reason alone that this particular mystery is one that many believe should be left alone, to remain unsolved. But there are those who simply can't resist the call of the mountains, though. Or maybe it's the fact that should they find the treasure, they would know wealth beyond anything they could ever have imagined, even if it means tempting fate and possibly ending up dead or worse. It's hard to say what's really going on here, but the allure and the danger are equally undeniable, and more than likely this is another one of those bizarre legends that will continue on through the ages, perhaps until someone finds the treasure or otherwise proves it doesn't exist. Well, friends, there you have it. What do you think about these strange stories and legends of the Superstition Mountains and the Lost Dutchman mine? As always, I look forward to your comments, but please keep it friendly and respectful. Also, consider becoming a member of the channel. For less than the price of a good cup of coffee, you can take advantage of special membership perks and surprises. Just click the join button. Until we meet again, be good to yourselves and others. As for me, I'll see you a little further on down the trail. I'm Steve Stockton, and I'll talk to you next time.